Old cookbooks held side dishes that could steal the whole show. They were creamy, crunchy, and made with heart, not shortcuts. What if the best food we ever had is the kind we stopped making? Harvard beets were a sweet and sour side dish that reflected the Midwestern love of hearty, simple foods. Beets were simmered in vinegar, sugar, and butter until tender, then thickened into a glossy sauce. The balance of tangy and sweet flavors made them stand out among plainer vegetables. They were inexpensive, easy to prepare, and filling, which made them a regular presence at supper tables. Housewives often turned to this recipe when other vegetables were scarce, since beets stored well and were available throughout the year. Children sometimes resisted the strong flavor, but adults valued their versatility and nutrition. The dish was particularly popular in Midwestern kitchens, where families saw it as both practical and comforting. Over time, tastes shifted, and beets themselves became less common on American tables, leaving Harvard beets to fade into memory. For much of the 20th century, however, they were a staple side dish that represented the balance of thrift, flavor, and tradition in American cooking. Eggplant au vin reflected the growing trend of borrowing from European flavors to make vegetables more exciting. Sliced eggplant was layered in a baking dish, drenched with red wine sauce and baked until soft and savory. It was a side dish that carried richness and a touch of sophistication, offering something different from the heavy casseroles that dominated the era. Housewives liked it because it transformed a plain vegetable into something impressive without requiring expensive meat or cheese. The red wine gave it a bold flavor that set it apart, making it a conversation piece at dinner parties. Eggplant au vin was often paired with roasted chicken or beef, but it was strong enough to hold its own as a main for lighter meals. Though eggplant was not always a favorite among children, the sauce made it more approachable for adults. It represents the 1970s curiosity with international flair, a time when American cooks wanted to feel worldly without straying too far from comfort. Eggplant au vin is rarely seen today, but it once carried quiet elegance into everyday kitchens. Homemade sauerkraut was a tangy, crunchy staple deeply rooted in German-American cooking traditions during the mid-20th century. This fermented cabbage was prized for its sharp flavor and probiotic benefits, offering a unique taste that complemented hearty meats and robust meals. Betty Crocker cookbooks provided simple methods for making sauerkraut at home, emphasizing patience and proper fermentation to achieve the perfect balance of sourness and texture. The process involved shredding cabbage, salting it, and letting it ferment slowly, transforming a basic vegetable into a lively and flavorful side. Sauerkraut was a common accompaniment at family dinners, Oktoberfest celebrations, and holiday feasts, especially in regions with strong German heritage. Its crisp bite and tangy punch added brightness to heavy dishes like sausages and pork roasts. This side dish embodied a connection to heritage and home-style cooking, carrying traditions across generations while offering a distinctive tang that remains beloved by many today. Rice-stuffed bell peppers were a dish that turned summer garden bounty into something worth remembering. Grandma would take big, shiny peppers, green or red depending on what grew best, and hollow them out with care. Then came the filling: cooked rice mixed with cheese, vegetables, tomato sauce, and sometimes ground beef or beans. She would bake them until the peppers softened and the tops browned just slightly. The dish smelled like comfort itself, bubbling quietly in a worn-out casserole pan. These stuffed peppers were served warm, but tasted just as good the next day out of the icebox. They were frugal, filling, and full of flavor, ideal for feeding a crowd with just a few ingredients. For many families, they were a way to use up leftovers and still put something beautiful on the table. The colors alone made them feel like a celebration. They are still made here and there, but often buried under cheese or too fussy to feel the same. The original ones were about balance, vegetables doing the heavy lifting, rice carrying the weight. They were summer in edible form, baked in love. Tomato aspic with celery and olives was one of those curious gelatin-based sides that ruled vintage cookbooks but slipped quietly off dinner tables as times changed. You would take savory tomato juice or seasoned broth, Mix it with gelatin and suspend chopped celery, olives, and sometimes hard-boiled eggs inside, then chill it in a mold until firm. It sounds strange now, but back in the 1950s and 60s, molded salads were a symbol of pride and resourcefulness, showing up at luncheons, holiday dinners, and potlucks all across America. Tomato aspic was considered elegant, even a little fancy, turning pantry staples into a glossy, structured side that balanced out roast meats, fried chicken, or whatever leftovers you had. Families leaned on recipes like this to stretch groceries and bring something unique to the table without spending a fortune. It looked impressive, it used affordable ingredients, and it made even the simplest meal feel dressed up. You might not see tomato aspic much today outside of retro cookbooks or quirky food blogs, but back then, it was proof that creativity and practicality ruled the kitchen, no matter how odd the presentation looked. Boiled peanut and rice croquettes combined coastal Carolina flavors into a quick dish that brought the harvest of field and water to one plate. Grandmothers boiled green peanuts until tender, then ground them with cooked rice and a sprinkle of herbs to form a rich, nutty mixture. Small portions were shaped into balls and pan-fried until crisp and golden, creating a crunchy shell around a soft, flavorful center. The earthy peanuts paired beautifully with the mild rice, offering a satisfying snack or side dish that reflected both ingenuity and local abundance. These croquettes were perfect for gatherings when guests arrived unexpectedly because the ingredients were simple and the cooking time short. Children loved their bite-sized shape, while adults enjoyed the unique blend of flavors rarely found beyond the Carolina coast. Boiled peanut and rice croquettes showcased the creative ways Southern grandmothers honored regional crops and proved that a humble pairing could become something special with just a hot pan and skilled hands. Red-eye gravy was once a breakfast essential in many Southern homes, though it has nearly disappeared outside of small diners that still cling to tradition. This thin, salty gravy was made by frying country ham in a skillet and then deglazing the pan with strong black coffee. The mixture created a reddish-brown sauce with a sharp, savory flavor that was poured over grits, biscuits, or the ham itself. For farm families, it was both practical and resourceful, using nothing more than drippings and leftover coffee to stretch a meal. The bold taste was an acquired one, but it became a source of comfort for people who grew up with it. Red-eye gravy also carried cultural weight, as it symbolized a South that prized thrift and creativity in the kitchen. Many older Southerners still recall mornings when the smell of ham frying meant this gravy was on the way. Today, it is rare to find it outside of small-town diners or family kitchens, and its disappearance tells a story of changing tastes. Red-eye gravy remains a dish of memory rather than regular practice. Creamed onions were once a standard Thanksgiving side dish, showing up on tables across the country during the holiday season. Pearl onions were boiled until tender, then coated in a rich white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, sometimes finished with a sprinkle of nutmeg. The dish was warm, smooth, and comforting, offering a milder flavor that balanced stronger foods like turkey and stuffing. Families looked forward to it because it felt festive, appearing only during special occasions. Housewives valued it as a way to use inexpensive onions in a celebratory manner, transforming a humble vegetable into something elegant. Children might not have been enthusiastic, but they ate it because it was tradition. Over time, Thanksgiving menus expanded with new sides, and creamed onions quietly slipped away. Today, it is one of those dishes remembered by grandparents, but rarely prepared anymore. For much of the mid-century era, however, creamed onions held a place of honor on holiday tables, symbolizing warmth, tradition, and family togetherness during celebrations. Spanish rice with green peppers was one of those side dishes that showed up on dinner tables and potluck spreads all across the 1970s. Housewives would take plain rice, stir it into tomato sauce, then add onions and chopped bell peppers before baking it in the oven. The result was a colorful casserole that brought together sweetness, tang, and a little bite from the peppers. It was inexpensive and hearty, which made it perfect for families looking to stretch meals without serving the same old plain rice every night. Spanish rice was often paired with chicken or pork chops, but it could also stand on its own next to beans or salad. Some cooks even added a sprinkle of cheese on top, letting it melt into a gooey crust. The dish carried a sense of flair because it looked fancier than it really was, and the peppers gave it a bright edge that guests remembered. Today, it feels like a relic, but in the 1970s, Spanish rice with green peppers was a dependable favorite that balanced thrift with flavor. Jellied cabbage salad might sound like a dare today, but in Grandma's kitchen, it was a dish of pride. This was not some jiggly dessert. This was savory gelatin, made with cabbage, carrots, vinegar, and sometimes a hint of onion or celery. The gelatin was clear and firm, often made with tomato or lemon juice instead of just water. The vegetables were suspended in it like little windows into the garden. It was served cold, sliced into neat squares, and always had a place at the table during luncheons or church dinners. Some versions were topped with mayonnaise or set into ring molds with a little lettuce garnish in the center. You had to have grown up with it to understand why it mattered. It was refreshing, texturally strange, but oddly satisfying. Today, we turn our noses up at savory gelatin, but back then, it was a sign of effort and hospitality. A dish that took time, not shortcuts. Maybe it is time we looked at those odd recipes again, with curiosity instead of judgment. Sweet and sour red cabbage was the tangy side dish that anchored family dinners, potlucks, and Sunday suppers for decades. You would slice red cabbage, simmer it with vinegar, sugar, and maybe bacon or apples for extra richness, and let it cook down until tender and glossy. The result was sweet and sour braised cabbage with a deep color and a bright, tangy bite that balanced heavier meals like roast pork or fried sausage. It came from old-world cooking traditions brought by European immigrants and slipped into American cookbooks by the 1940s. Folks leaned on cabbage to stretch meals when times were tight, but they still wanted hearty, flavorful sides. Sweet and sour red cabbage earned its place at the table by turning basic ingredients into something special. You hardly see it today unless you are flipping through vintage cookbooks or dining in old-school German restaurants, but back then, it was a dependable side that made plain meals feel brighter. Okra and tomatoes with rice was a classic side dish that thrived in southern kitchens, blending garden staples into a filling, flavorful plate. Fresh okra was sliced and stewed with tomatoes, onions, and sometimes bacon fat, then spooned generously over rice. It was inexpensive and wholesome, relying on vegetables that were easy to grow in the southern climate. For families, it was a dependable dish that appeared at weeknight dinners, Sunday suppers, and potlucks alike. The combination of tangy tomatoes and tender okra gave it a unique texture and taste that many children learned to love, even if reluctantly at first. Rice made it hearty enough to stand alone when meat was scarce, adding value to a humble dish. Though once celebrated, it has slowly faded as processed foods and fast meals replaced traditional garden cooking. Today, it is remembered mainly in rural kitchens or cookbooks. Okra and tomatoes with rice remains a snapshot of how Southern cooks turned simple harvests into comfort. Roasted chestnut and sorghum soup brought a smoky sweetness to winter tables in the quiet hill towns of Kentucky where chestnuts were once plentiful. Grandmothers carefully roasted the nuts over an open flame, peeling them while still warm to release their earthy aroma. The tender chestnuts simmered with onions, a pinch of salt, and a ladle of rich sorghum syrup that added a deep caramel note. Slowly cooked over a low fire, the soup thickened to a velvety texture that comforted families on cold nights when snow lay heavy outside. Its combination of smoke, nut, and molasses sweetness created a flavor both rustic and luxurious, reminding everyone of forest harvests and the steady rhythm of winter. Children were often sent to gather the fallen chestnuts, learning to value the seasonal bounty. This dish reflected a time when the forest provided not just fuel but also food, and when every warm bowl told a story of patience and resourcefulness. Roasted chestnut and sorghum soup remains a rare taste of a nearly forgotten Appalachian tradition. Chili cheese rice squares were the side dish that packed a little heat and a whole lot of practicality into dinner tables, potlucks, and picnic baskets across the country. You would take cooked rice, shredded cheese, chili powder, maybe some canned chilies or beans, mix it together, press it into a baking dish, and bake it until firm enough to slice into neat little squares. They were easy to pack, easy to serve, and they stretched pantry staples into a filling, flavorful side with a hint of Tex-Mex flair. Recipes like this showed up in community cookbooks from the 1950s through the 70s when families needed dishes that traveled well, fed a crowd, and made every meal feel a little more exciting without breaking the bank. Chili cheese rice squares were a regular at church potlucks, school lunches, or backyard cookouts because they were budget-friendly, simple, and satisfying without needing fancy ingredients. You hardly see them today outside of old recipe cards, but back then, they were the clever, portable side that kept bellies full and meals stress-free. Creamed celery was the quiet guest at the table. Never the centerpiece, but always welcome beside a roast or baked chicken. Celery might not sound exciting today, but back then it was a dependable staple, easy to grow and even easier to find at the corner grocer. Grandma would simmer sliced celery until just tender, then bathe it in a velvety white sauce made from milk, butter, and a dusting of flour. Sometimes she would add a splash of broth or a sprinkle of nutmeg to make it more elegant. It was soft, mild, and deeply nostalgic, food that asked nothing of you except to slow down and enjoy it. You would find creamed celery at Sunday suppers, Easter dinners, and any meal where someone wanted to show they cared. It was not flashy, but that was never the point. It reminded people of gentler times, of manners and matching dishes and sitting down to eat as a family. These days, celery is more likely to end up in juice or chopped raw into a salad. Creamed spinach was a rich and traditional vegetable accompaniment that found its way onto many classic American dinner tables. Tender spinach leaves were cooked down and enveloped in a smooth, creamy white sauce made from butter, cream, and sometimes cheese or nutmeg. This dish was prized for its silky texture and deep, comforting flavor, making it an ideal partner for steaks, roasts, and holiday meals. Betty Crocker cookbooks frequently included creamed spinach as a reliable crowd pleaser, offering home cooks a way to elevate greens into a luxurious side dish. The creaminess softened the sometimes bitter edge of spinach, creating a luscious mouthfeel that felt indulgent yet nourishing. Its glossy, pale green appearance made it visually inviting, and its rich flavor helped balance hearty mains. Creamed spinach remains a symbol of timeless comfort food, showcasing how simple ingredients can create a dish full of warmth and nostalgia. French dressing mold was one of the more daring uses of gelatin during the decade, turning salad dressing into a solid side dish. Housewives would combine French dressing with unflavored gelatin, then fold in vegetables like celery, olives, or green peppers before letting it set in ornate molds. The result was a wobbly, tangy creation that looked almost too strange to eat, but always sparked conversation. Served sliced, it offered bright color and unusual texture alongside heavier mains. Some versions included hard-boiled eggs for extra substance. French dressing mold reflected the obsession with molds that swept through kitchens at the time, where anything could be transformed into a shimmering side. It was thrifty, it was experimental, and it carried the charm of novelty. Though it is hard to imagine today, guests once accepted it as part of the playful spread. French dressing mold may not have aged well, but it remains a clear reminder of the fearless culinary creativity of the 1970s. Wild rice pilaf was once considered an exotic and special side dish, particularly in the Midwest where wild rice was harvested locally. The nutty flavor and chewy texture made it stand out compared to plain white rice, and it was often combined with mushrooms, onions, and broth. Pilaf was usually reserved for holidays, weddings, or Sunday dinners when something more refined was expected. Housewives appreciated that it looked elegant but was not overly complicated to prepare. Children often approached it with suspicion, unused to darker grains, but adults embraced its rich flavor and sense of novelty. As convenience rice products and boxed mixes grew in popularity, wild rice pilaf faded from everyday use. It became associated more with fine dining than family tables, losing its role as a celebratory household dish. Still, in the mid-century years, wild rice pilaf was a symbol of sophistication, showing how even modest kitchens could present something that felt worldly, special, and different from the daily routine of potatoes or bread. Pickled watermelon rind was one of the most surprising side dishes of the decade, turning what many would throw away into something flavorful and refreshing. Housewives peeled the green outer skin, sliced the white rind, and simmered it in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and spices until it became tender and tangy. The result was a sweet-sour pickle that was served in relish trays or alongside meats. It was a way of practicing thrift while also creating a unique taste that stood out at gatherings. Families valued it because it stretched food further and prevented waste, while guests admired its novelty. Pickled watermelon rind reflected the ingenuity of making use of every part of seasonal produce. It brought brightness to heavy meals and was a talking point at tables where everyone expected the usual pickles. Though it has nearly disappeared today, it once stood proudly as a reminder of how resourcefulness and creativity could turn scraps into something memorable. Baked potato salad was a warm variation of the classic salad, combining potatoes with bacon, onions, and a tangy dressing served either hot or cold. This recipe appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a hearty and flavorful side perfect for picnics, barbecues, and potlucks. The potatoes were usually boiled or roasted, then mixed with crisp bacon pieces and sautéed onions, all tossed in a dressing that balanced tanginess with creaminess. Serving the salad warm brought out the depth of flavors and made it especially comforting during cooler months. Its rich yet simple combination of ingredients made it a popular choice for those seeking a side that went beyond the usual. Baked potato salad offered a nostalgic taste of Americana, blending smoky, savory, and tangy notes into one satisfying dish. It captured the mid-century spirit of hearty, shareable food that brought families and friends together around the table. Glazed turnips were one of Grandma's ways of making stubborn vegetables taste like something worth getting seconds of. She would peel and cube them, then simmer them in a pan with butter, sugar, and a splash of broth or vinegar until they were soft and glossy. The natural bitterness of the turnip mellowed into something sweet and earthy, with a flavor that felt oddly fancy for such a humble root. Glazed turnips were often served beside roasts or ham, especially when the fancier vegetables were too expensive or out of season. It was the kind of dish that showed up quietly, then disappeared just as quietly. No fuss, no leftovers. A lot of kids wrinkled their noses at first, but ended up going back for more. You almost never hear about this recipe now, not even in family newsletters or holiday cookbooks. But there was a time when turnips had their moment, and Grandma made sure of it. It was not about turning vegetables into something they were not. It was about bringing out the best in what you had. Rice ring with creamed vegetables was the side you pulled out to impress, even if all you had was rice, peas, and a few carrots. This molded rice dish showed up at luncheons, community suppers, and potlucks from the 1930s to the 60s, proving how fancy rice could look with the right presentation. You cooked seasoned rice, packed it into a bundt or gelatin mold, and once it's set, filled the center with creamy peas, carrots, and maybe mushrooms or green beans if you had them. It was affordable, filling, and looked fancier than it really was. These molded sides were all the rage, straight from vintage cookbooks with curled edges and faded ink. Rice ring with creamed vegetables was a no-nonsense way to stretch pantry staples while making the table look proper. You hardly see it outside old recipe cards now, but back then, it was a thrifty, creative dish that added kitchen pride to any meal. Muscadine skillet cobbler celebrated the thick-skinned wild grapes that ripened late in southern summers, filling the air with their musky perfume. Grandmothers simmered the grapes with sugar until the juices turned deep purple, then poured the bubbling fruit into a cast-iron skillet lined with a simple cornmeal batter. As it baked, the batter rose through the grapes, creating golden pockets that soaked up the sweet syrup. The cobbler emerged fragrant and richly colored, a dessert that captured the fleeting taste of the wild vines. Families often picked the grapes together, braving tangled thickets for the reward of a warm evening treat. Served with fresh cream or enjoyed plain, each spoonful offered a burst of tart sweetness and the satisfaction of food gathered by hand. Muscadine skillet cobbler remains a reminder of late summer nights, family foraging trips, and the joy of transforming wild fruit into a rustic masterpiece that could never be replicated with store-bought grapes. Sorghum molasses. Stack cake was more than a dessert. It was a centerpiece of Appalachian weddings and celebrations. Families in the mountains could not afford elaborate tiered cakes, so they created this dish by stacking thin layers of cake, often baked by different neighbors, with a filling made of sorghum molasses and stewed apples. The result was a dense, sweet cake that grew moister and more flavorful the longer it rested. Sorghum molasses, cheaper than sugar, added depth and a rustic sweetness unique to the region. Each layer symbolized the contribution of family and community, turning the cake into more than food. It was a collective expression of joy. Though once beloved, it faded as refined sugar and store-bought cakes became accessible, leaving stack cakes as a fading memory. Today, they survive mostly in regional cookbooks or heritage festivals, rarely baked in modern kitchens. Yet the sorghum molasses stack cake endures in memory as proof of how Southern cooks transformed scarcity into celebration. Its absence today is not just the loss of a recipe, but the fading of a cultural ritual of sharing and resilience. Marinated artichoke hearts became a fashionable side dish in the 1970s, when the rise of Mediterranean flavors gave American tables something exotic. Housewives bought jars of artichokes packed in oil and herbs, serving them cold alongside roasts, pasta, or chicken. They looked elegant in glass dishes, offering a glossy sheen and unusual flavor compared to ordinary vegetables. For many families, they represented sophistication, the kind of food you might see in magazines and want to try at home. Children were often baffled by their taste, but adults embraced them as proof that everyday meals could feel cosmopolitan. They showed up at potlucks, dinner parties, and even holiday spreads, often combined with olives or cheese. The convenience of simply opening a jar made them especially attractive during busy years when families wanted flavor without fuss. Eventually, their novelty wore off, and marinated artichokes became less common outside specialty cooking. Still, for a time, they were a symbol of trendiness, showing how international foods could reshape the American side dish. Cabbage slaw with sunflower seeds was a crunchy twist on the classic coleslaw, giving it a slightly nutty bite that made it memorable. Shredded cabbage was tossed with carrots and sometimes raisins, then mixed with mayonnaise or vinegar dressing. Sunflower seeds were sprinkled in, adding both texture and a surprising depth of flavor. This variation became popular because it felt fresh and wholesome, fitting the health-focused trends creeping into the 1970s. It was also affordable, since cabbage was inexpensive and sunflower seeds were widely available in bulk. Families loved it because it paired well with grilled meats, baked chicken, or sandwiches, and it held up well at picnics. It was light but filling, crunchy but creamy, and versatile enough for all kinds of gatherings. Children often picked at the seeds while parents appreciated the nutritional value. Though it has almost vanished from modern tables, cabbage slaw with sunflower seeds once stood proudly as a reflection of the era's push toward foods that felt both homemade and just a little different. Spinach and mushroom casserole was a hearty vegetable side that brought comfort and creaminess to the dinner table. Tender spinach and earthy mushrooms were baked together in a rich, creamy sauce, often thickened with cheese or cream of mushroom soup, creating a luscious dish with layers of flavor. Betty Crocker cookbooks frequently featured this casserole as a crowd-pleasing accompaniment to roasts or holiday meals, appreciated for turning humble vegetables into something indulgent and satisfying. The mushrooms added a meaty texture that balanced the tender spinach, while the creamy sauce wrapped everything in warmth and richness. This casserole could be prepared ahead of time and baked just before serving, making it a convenient option for busy home cooks. Its combination of fresh greens and deep mushroom flavors made it a staple in kitchens longing for both nutrition and comfort. The golden top, sometimes sprinkled with breadcrumbs or extra cheese, gave it an inviting crust that made it hard to resist. German potato salad was never meant to be cold, and that was the beauty of it. Grandma would boil red potatoes until tender, then toss them with crisp bacon, diced onions, and a sharp vinegary dressing while everything was still warm. The result was tangy, salty, and just a little sweet, rich from the bacon but lifted by the vinegar. It was a staple at summer picnics and church potlucks, served straight from the pan or kept warm under foil. Unlike the creamy versions most people know today, this one had no mayonnaise and needed no chilling. It felt more like a real dish than a filler side, and it paired perfectly with sausages, roast chicken, or just a good slice of rye bread. You might find a recipe scribbled in pencil in the back of Grandma's cookbook, passed down from a German aunt or neighbor. It was hearty, practical, and impossible to stop eating once you started. These days, it is rare to find someone who still makes it from scratch. But the warmth, both literal and emotional, is something no cold potato salad can match. Sour cream noodle bake was the kind of creamy, carb-loaded side dish that quietly filled plates and bellies all across America, especially at mid-century potlucks and family dinners. You would boil up egg noodles, toss them with sour cream, butter, chives, and sometimes a little cheese, then bake the whole thing until warm and bubbling with golden edges. It was pure comfort food, straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that promised to stretch your groceries and still bring something hearty to the table. Sour cream noodle bake balanced creamy richness with just enough tang, making it a perfect side for roast chicken, pork chops, or fried meats when times were lean. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, filling, and easy to whip up with pantry staples, especially when grocery budgets were tight and every meal needed to count. You would find it at church dinners, neighborhood potlucks, or scribbled on index cards tucked in recipe boxes, quietly holding its place as a dependable, cozy side dish. It slipped off most menus today, but back then, it made every plate feel just a little more complete. Rabbit liver pate with sorghum drizzle turned the careful use of every part of a hunted animal into a delicacy worthy of Sunday gatherings. Grandmothers gently sautéed fresh rabbit livers with onions and herbs, then pureed the mixture until smooth and creamy. Chilled and served with crusty bread, the rich spread was finished with a thin ribbon of sweet sorghum syrup that balanced the earthy depth of the meat. This dish reflected both thrift and elegance, a way to honor the animal by wasting nothing while creating a centerpiece that impressed guests. Hunters brought in the rabbits, but it was the grandmothers who transformed the humble ingredients into something memorable. The combination of savory and sweet made each bite complex and satisfying, a quiet celebration of resourcefulness and skill. Rabbit liver pate with sorghum drizzle stands as proof that fine flavor can come from simple origins when guided by hands that understand both necessity and grace. Shoe fly pie, while often linked with Pennsylvania Dutch, had a strong foothold in Southern farm kitchens too. This pie was built on molasses, a cheap sweetener that gave it a dark, rich flavor unmatched by sugar. Crumb topping made from flour, butter, and sugar was sprinkled over the filling, creating a pie that was both sticky and tender. For farming families, it was an easy way to transform pantry staples into something indulgent. Shoe fly pie often appeared on breakfast tables as well as at supper, offering sweetness at any time of day. The name supposedly came from the need to shoo flies away from the sticky molasses, a detail children found amusing. Though once common, the pie slowly disappeared as molasses faded from southern kitchens, replaced by refined sugar and more modern desserts. Shoe fly pie endures in folklore but rarely in reality, leaving only a memory of its humble, sweet character. Forgotten now, it represents the deep ties between food, resourcefulness, and the land that made it possible. Potato puffs made thrifty use of leftover mashed potatoes, turning them into something crisp and golden that families looked forward to. Housewives mixed mashed potatoes with eggs, flour, and seasonings, shaping small patties that were fried until light and fluffy. The result was a side dish that stretched yesterday's dinner into something new and satisfying. Children loved the crunchy exterior and soft interior, which made them more exciting than plain mashed potatoes. Potato puffs fit well into a culture that wasted nothing, transforming scraps into a dish worth celebrating. They were often served at family suppers or church gatherings where plates of these little bites disappeared quickly. Some recipes added cheese, onions, or herbs when available, but the basic version remained a staple because of its simplicity. Over time, boxed potato mixes and convenience foods replaced the ritual of making them at home. While rarely seen today, potato puffs once symbolized resourcefulness, proving that even the humblest leftovers could be transformed into a comforting family favorite without spending much at all. Tomato aspic with shrimp garnish might be the ultimate example of how far gelatin molds could be pushed during the 1970s. Housewives would take tomato juice, mix it with unflavored gelatin, and let it set in ornate molds until it became a firm, jiggling centerpiece. On top of that shimmering red dome, cold shrimp would be arranged in neat patterns, often crowned with parsley for decoration. The dish was tangy, savory, and oddly refreshing, though the texture caught some people off guard. It was served cold as a side or appetizer, sometimes sliced into wedges like a cake. For potlucks and luncheons, tomato aspic stood out on the table because it looked unusual and sophisticated. It was the kind of dish that showed effort and creativity, even if guests approached it with caution. In an era that loved experimentation with molds, this savory gelatin became a conversation starter as much as a food. Though long gone from modern tables, it represents the quirky inventiveness of 1970s kitchens. Baked zucchini casserole was a satisfying and versatile vegetable side that combined tender zucchini slices with cheese, breadcrumbs, and herbs for a warm, comforting dish. This casserole appeared frequently in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an easy way to make use of garden-fresh zucchini or grocery store finds. The zucchini was layered or mixed with a creamy cheese sauce, topped with crunchy breadcrumbs, then baked until golden brown and bubbling. This method brought out the best in zucchini's mild flavor, adding richness and texture that made the dish irresistible. The herbs provided fragrant notes that elevated the casserole's taste, while the toasted crust added a delightful contrast to the soft interior. Ideal for summer dinners or holiday spreads, baked zucchini casserole was cherished for its combination of freshness, comfort, and ease. It offered a delicious way to enjoy vegetables that felt indulgent without being heavy. This recipe was a testament to mid-century ingenuity in the kitchen, turning simple ingredients into something truly special. Corn oysters were one of those Depression-era dishes that did not have a lick of seafood but still felt like something fancy. Grandma would mix corn, usually fresh or canned, with eggs, flour, and a bit of milk to make a thick batter. Then she would fry little spoonfuls in hot oil or bacon grease until they puffed up golden and crispy around the edges. The name came from the way they looked, round, plump, and golden, like a fried oyster. But they were made of nothing more than corn and love. These fritters were often served as a side dish with soup or meatloaf, or even stacked up for breakfast. They were quick to make, easy to stretch, and always got eaten before they had time to cool. Kids loved them, adults counted on them, and they used up whatever corn you had on hand. Some folks added chopped peppers or onions for extra flavor, but the original was good enough all by itself. Corn oysters were proof that you did not need much to make something satisfying. You just needed a hot pan, a good spoon, and a little bit of memory. Applesauce Jell-O salad was one of those quirky, retro sides that only made sense when you were flipping through the faded pages of mid-century cookbooks. But for years, this was a potluck classic everyone recognized. You would mix sweet applesauce with cinnamon-flavored gelatin, let it chill until firm, and slice it into glossy, bright red servings that wobbled onto dinner plates. Some folks added chopped nuts or whipped topping, but at its core, this recipe was simple, affordable, and stretched pantry staples into a playful sweet side. Applesauce Jell-O salad showed up everywhere from church suppers to backyard picnics, offering a cool, tangy balance to heavy meals like meatloaf, pork chops, or casseroles. It made you smile, even if it raised an eyebrow. Families loved how easy it was to throw together using ingredients they already had, turning a plain dinner into something a little more colorful. You hardly see it now. But back then, that shiny red salad was proof that even the simplest ingredients could brighten up the table and bring comfort to mealtime. Pickled watermelon rind. Fritters turned what most would throw away into a crunchy, tangy treat that surprised visitors with every bite. After summer watermelons were enjoyed down to the pale green rind, grandmothers peeled and brined the leftovers with vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until they became sweetly tart. Chopped and folded into a light cornmeal batter, The pickled pieces were spooned into hot oil where they sizzled and browned within minutes. The result was a crisp fritter that burst with a subtle sweetness and a lively bite of vinegar, a perfect balance that paired beautifully with strong tea or a cold glass of milk. Families appreciated how nothing from the melon went to waste, and children loved the playful contrast of flavors that felt both dessert and snack. These fritters captured the Southern habit of thrift and creativity, transforming scraps into a delicacy worthy of company. Pickled watermelon rind fritters stand as proof that careful preservation and a hot skillet could turn the humblest ingredient into a memorable taste of summer. Fried catfish roe was once a prized seasonal delicacy in southern fishing communities, celebrated for its crisp texture and savory flavor. When fishermen brought in catfish, nothing was wasted, and the roe was dredged in cornmeal and fried until golden. It was often served alongside hush puppies or simple greens, making a meal that felt indulgent despite its humble origins. Families valued it as a rare treat tied to the rhythms of the river, where seasonal catches dictated what appeared on the table. Children grew up with memories of this dish as a reward for long days spent fishing with parents or grandparents. It reflected a time when local waters directly fed households and traditions. Today, fried catfish roe has nearly disappeared, pushed aside by changing tastes and concerns about sourcing. Few restaurants still serve it, and many younger Southerners have never tasted it. Its loss marks a fading link between people and the waterways that once sustained them, leaving it more a memory than a menu item. Molded cranberry salad was one of those gelatin creations that became linked to Thanksgiving and Christmas meals. Cranberries, often canned, were mixed with nuts, citrus, and sometimes celery, then set in a bright red gelatin mold. It was eye-catching, colorful, and perfectly in step with the mid-century love of molded salads. Housewives served it as a side dish that walked the line between savory and sweet, complementing turkey and stuffing with its tart bite. Children liked the wobbling texture and sweetness, while adults valued the festive presentation it brought to the table. The dish reflected how important appearance had become in family meals, where even side dishes were expected to impress guests. Molded cranberry salad carried a celebratory quality, marking holidays with something more decorative than practical. Though it has almost entirely disappeared from modern feasts, it was once an expected presence at holiday dinners, a symbol of how food and tradition worked hand in hand to create family memories. Cold beet borscht cups brought an unusual European influence into American kitchens of the 1970s. Beets were boiled, chilled, and pureed into a cold soup flavored with vinegar, dill, and sometimes sour cream. Instead of serving it in bowls, housewives poured it into small cups, offering it as a quirky side or appetizer. The vibrant magenta color made it striking, and its refreshing taste stood out at summer gatherings. While not everyone embraced its earthy flavor, those who did found it invigorating, especially when paired with bread or crackers. Cold beet borscht cups reflected the era's willingness to experiment with international dishes, even if they seemed unusual on American tables. They were considered refined in some circles, a nod to cosmopolitan tastes during a decade of culinary curiosity. For families, they offered variety and a sense of something different from the usual casseroles and gelatin salads. Today, they seem nearly forgotten, but they once represented the adventurous spirit of 1970s kitchens. Sweet corn relish was a tangy and sweet condiment made from fresh corn kernels combined with onions and peppers, often pickled to create a crunchy, flavorful side. This relish was featured in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a versatile accompaniment that added zest and texture to sandwiches, grilled meats, and picnic spreads. The corn was mixed with diced onions and sweet or hot peppers, then dressed in a vinegar-based solution that gave it a bright, tangy kick. Sweet corn relish was prized for its balance of sweetness from the corn and sharpness from the pickling, creating a refreshing counterpoint to heavier dishes. It was easy to prepare and store, making it a popular homemade staple during mid-century summers and harvest seasons. This relish captured the era's enthusiasm for preserving fresh produce while adding bold flavor to everyday meals. Its crunchy texture and lively taste made it a memorable and well-loved side that brought brightness to any plate. Ambrosia salad was not really a salad in the way we think of salads today. It was a dessert disguised as a side dish. Grandma would fold together canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, mini marshmallows, and whipped cream, sometimes with a spoonful of sour cream to give it balance. It was creamy, sweet, and just fancy enough to make it onto the holiday table next to the turkey or ham. For many families, this was a taste of celebration. Kids loved it for the marshmallows, adults appreciated the simplicity, and everyone agreed it belonged at every potluck. Ambrosia was the kind of thing that made it into every community cookbook. Easy to make, hard to mess up, and always a crowd pleaser. You could throw it together with pantry items, let it chill for a few hours, and it would hold up just fine. Some versions added maraschino cherries or pecans for a little extra flair. These days, you might see similar flavors in retro-themed desserts, but the original ambrosia has mostly disappeared from our tables. Maybe it was too sweet, too fluffy, or just too old-fashioned. Watergate salad, also known as pistachio delight, was one of those playful pastel green sides that walked the line between dessert and salad, confusing generations of potluck guests along the way. You would mix instant pistachio pudding with whipped topping, marshmallows, canned pineapple, and chopped nuts, fold it all together, and serve it chilled in a big glass bowl that practically screamed retro kitsch. It sounds more like a dessert, but back in the 1970s, this fluffy, sweet salad showed up next to roast ham, turkey, and casseroles at family dinners and holiday gatherings. Watergate salad came straight from the pages of vintage cookbooks, celebrated for how it turned inexpensive pantry staples into a crowd pleaser with hardly any effort. It earned its place at the table by stretching ingredients, adding color, and giving every meal a playful, sugary twist. You might not see it much today outside of retro recipe revivals, but once upon a time, this fluffy green salad meant you brought your best, even if it doubled as dessert. Strange by today's standards, but back then, it was a potluck must-have that turned heads and satisfied sweet tooths. Parched corn snack was a pocket-sized taste of Southern thrift and tradition, perfect for long afternoons on the porch or walks through the fields. Dried corn kernels were slowly pan-toasted in a heavy iron skillet until each kernel puffed slightly and released a warm, nutty aroma. Grandmothers stirred the corn constantly to keep it from scorching, seasoning it only with a pinch of salt once the toasting was complete. The result was a crunchy snack that kept well in jars and traveled easily in pockets or small sacks, making it a favorite for children exploring woods and streams. It carried the sweet, earthy flavor of the harvest in every bite and required no sugar or fancy additions to satisfy. Families often made large batches after the corn harvest to enjoy through the winter months. Parched corn snack remains a simple reminder of times when the land provided both food and entertainment, and when the careful hand of a grandmother could transform plain grain into something worth remembering. Corn dodgers were a humble food that carried workers through long days in the fields or on the road. Made from cornmeal, salt, and water, sometimes enriched with lard, the dough was shaped into small cakes and fried or baked. They were sturdy, portable, and filling, making them perfect for laborers who needed food that could travel. Families packed them into lunch pails, and soldiers carried them during the Civil War, keeping the tradition alive for generations. Corn dodgers were often eaten plain, but sometimes dipped in molasses or gravy if available. They symbolized a kind of practical cooking where function mattered more than luxury. Though simple, they were tied to the rhythms of work, hunger, and endurance. Today, corn dodgers are rarely seen outside of history books or reenactments, forgotten in favor of softer breads and convenience foods. Yet their story reminds us how much people relied on ingenuity to make basic grains stretch. Corn dodgers were never glamorous, but they were dependable. Fried apples were once a familiar side dish in Southern homes, where fruit was often treated as part of the main meal rather than dessert. Sliced apples were sautéed in butter and sprinkled with sugar, cooked until tender and golden. The dish had a natural sweetness that made it popular with children, while still pairing well with savory foods like pork chops or biscuits. Housewives liked fried apples because they required no special equipment, just a skillet and whatever fruit was on hand. They worked especially well in autumn, when orchards provided more apples than families could eat fresh. Leftover apples nearing spoilage could also be saved from waste by frying them, which fit the thrifty mentality of the time. The scent of apples cooking in butter filled kitchens with warmth and comfort, becoming part of many families' food memories. Although fried apples have mostly vanished from modern dinners, they remain one of those sides that defined regional tradition, a reminder of when practicality and sweetness blended seamlessly on the dinner table. Frosted lime salad was a vivid green spectacle that lived on buffet tables and Sunday dinners throughout the decade. It began with lime-flavored gelatin, which was poured into molds and chilled until firm. On top of that shimmering green base, housewives would spread a frosting made of cream cheese blended with crushed pineapple. The result was a layered dish that was part dessert, part salad, and entirely a conversation starter. Guests marveled at its bold color and unusual combination of tangy, sweet, and creamy flavors. Children enjoyed the pineapple while adults admired the cool, refreshing texture. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the gelatin craze of the 1970s, where even salads were expected to jiggle. Frosted lime salad carried an almost retro elegance, presented in rings, domes, or squares depending on the mold used. Though its popularity faded, it still embodies the playful experimentation of an era that valued novelty as much as taste. In its own quirky way, frosted lime salad reflected the 1970s at its brightest and boldest. Cheese and pineapple skewers were a fun and flavorful appetizer side that perfectly blended sweet and savory notes. Cubed cheese, often cheddar or a mild American variety, was paired with juicy pineapple chunks on toothpicks, creating bite-sized delights that were both refreshing and rich. This combination featured prominently in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a party favorite and an easy-to-prepare hors d'oeuvre. The sharpness of the cheese contrasted with the tropical sweetness of the pineapple, making every bite a balanced explosion of flavors. These skewers were popular at potlucks, holiday gatherings, and casual get-togethers, offering a colorful and attractive option that was simple yet sophisticated. The ease of assembly made them a go-to for hosts wanting to impress without fuss. Their combination of textures, creamy cheese and juicy fruit, made for an unexpectedly delightful treat that could easily double as a side dish or a snack. Creamed cucumbers were a summertime staple, cool, tangy, and surprisingly comforting. Grandma would slice cucumbers paper-thin and let them sit with salt until they softened just enough. Then she would stir in a mixture of cream, vinegar, sugar, and dill to create a light, soupy dressing that clung to every bite. Served cold in a glass bowl, creamed cucumbers were the answer to long, hot days and heavy main dishes. They were crisp, clean, and a little bit indulgent in their own way. You could eat them with fried chicken, pork chops, or all on their own with a slice of bread. It was one of those recipes that looked effortless but had just the right balance of flavors. It cooled you down without making you feel like you were missing out. Nowadays, you might find cucumber salads with yogurt or fancy vinaigrettes, but the original creamed version has almost vanished. That old-school charm, the soft herbs, the tangy cream, has been quietly replaced. But there is something about the way it felt to scoop out a chilled bowl and take a bite that felt like it belonged to home. Green bean and mushroom casserole without the soup was the forgotten, homemade version of a side dish families leaned on before canned shortcuts took over. You would cook fresh green beans, sauté mushrooms with butter and onions, stir in cream sauce from scratch, and bake it all with crisp breadcrumbs or fried onions. It was hearty, practical, and made with real ingredients long before condensed soups became a shortcut. This casserole showed up at Sunday dinners, holidays, and potlucks, sitting next to roast meats or ham, adding creamy, comforting balance to every bite. Families loved it for stretching produce, filling plates, and making even basic meals feel special. The homemade version faded when convenience cooking took over, but back then, it was pure comfort with none of the shortcuts. You hardly see it now unless you are flipping through vintage cookbooks or swapping recipes with your grandmother, but once upon a time, this casserole was proof that simple, honest food could steal the show. Mayhaw jelly-glazed pork roast shone as a celebration dish that captured the fleeting sweetness of spring in the rural South. Wild mayhaw berries ripened along swampy creeks only for a brief season, and grandmothers transformed them into jewel-toned jelly prized for its tart, bright flavor. When a pork roast slowly cooked in a wood-fired oven, they brushed the meat with the shimmering jelly during the final minutes, letting the glaze caramelize into a glossy coat. The combination of tender pork and tangy fruit created a balance of savory and sweet that marked special Sundays or community gatherings. Guests could taste the care that went into picking the berries and simmering them down to a rich preserve. This meal linked family to land and season, turning a simple cut of pork into something unforgettable. Even today, the memory of that vibrant glaze speaks of Southern kitchens where nothing was rushed and every ingredient told a story of place and patience. Hogshead cheese was a dish that made full use of an animal, born from nose-to-tail traditions where nothing could be wasted. Despite its name, it contained no cheese at all, but was instead a cold cut made by boiling the head of a pig with spices, onions, and vinegar until the meat and gelatin formed a solid loaf. Once chilled, it was sliced and served cold, often with crackers or bread. For rural Southerners, Hogshead cheese was practical, economical, and surprisingly flavorful. It reflected a time when families valued every scrap and could not afford to throw anything away. Children might have balked at the idea, but many adults treasured its rich taste. Hogshead cheese was also sold in local butcher shops and became a staple of working-class lunches. Today, it is rare to find outside specialty stores or heritage festivals, its strong flavor and rustic origins falling out of favor. Still, it tells the story of thrift, resilience, and respect for every part of the hog. Jell-O vegetable salad was a creation that reflected both creativity and mid-century pride in convenience foods. Housewives would suspend peas, carrots, celery, or even olives inside brightly colored gelatin molds, often flavored with lime or lemon. These molds were carefully unmolded onto plates, sometimes garnished with lettuce to make them look more formal. They were a display piece as much as a side dish, reflecting how gelatin symbolized modern cooking in the 1960s. For children, it was often confusing to see vegetables trapped in wobbly desserts, but for adults, it represented resourcefulness and style. Recipes appeared in magazines and community cookbooks, encouraging homemakers to experiment with colors and textures. At potlucks, these shimmering molds stood tall on tables, admired as much for their appearance as their taste. Over time, the trend faded as people grew weary of the odd flavor pairings. Yet for a period, Jell-O vegetable salads were not just food but conversation starters at American family tables. Cold noodle salad with sesame seeds reflected the gradual influence of Asian flavors entering American kitchens in the 1970s. Thin noodles were boiled, chilled, and tossed with sesame seeds, soy sauce, and sometimes sliced scallions. The dish was served cold, offering a refreshing break from heavier casseroles. It was easy to prepare in large batches, making it perfect for potlucks and picnics. For many families, it was their first taste of international cuisine adapted to suit local preferences. Sesame seeds added nuttiness and crunch, while the soy sauce provided a salty depth that was new to many palates. Housewives appreciated its novelty and lightness, especially during the warmer months. Children enjoyed the simple flavors, while adults praised its uniqueness. Cold noodle salad with sesame seeds was a modest step toward culinary diversity, proving that even small changes in ingredients could reshape tables. It may not have survived into modern popularity, but it marked a moment when tastes began to expand in earnest. Deviled potato salad put a zesty spin on the traditional potato salad by adding a tangy mustard-based dressing that packed a flavorful punch. This vintage recipe took boiled potatoes and tossed them in a dressing made with yellow mustard, mayonnaise, vinegar, and seasonings to create a vibrant and slightly spicy side dish. Betty Crocker Cookbooks celebrated deviled potato salad for its bold taste and easy preparation, making it a favorite at picnics, barbecues, and family gatherings. The mustard gave the creamy salad a lively kick that contrasted nicely with the soft potatoes, adding excitement to a classic comfort food. Often garnished with chopped chives or paprika, this salad brought both color and flavor to the table. It was a dish that pleased crowds by balancing creamy, tangy, and savory elements, all while remaining simple enough for home cooks to prepare in advance. Deviled potato salad remains a nostalgic reminder of inventive takes on beloved American classics. Baked stuffed apples were not always about sugar and cinnamon. In Grandma's kitchen, they could be savory too, filled with sausage, breadcrumbs, and chopped nuts or onions. The apples were cored and packed with the mixture, then baked until soft and just slightly caramelized on the outside. The stuffing soaked up the apple juices and turned into something warm and earthy with just a hint of sweetness. It was the kind of side dish that blurred the lines between sweet and savory in the best way. Served with pork chops or roast poultry, it brought balance and surprise to the plate. You might have seen them during holidays or Sunday dinners when Grandma wanted to offer something memorable. They looked beautiful too, rustic and golden, with a scent that filled the kitchen. Nowadays, we think of apples as pie or snack food, not as a vehicle for stuffing. But once upon a time, they held more than sugar. They held creativity, thrift, and a kind of elegance we do not always recognize anymore. Buttered parsley potatoes were the kind of humble, forgotten side dish that quietly filled plates and satisfied appetites across America, especially during lean times. You would boil small baby potatoes, toss them in butter, sprinkle with chopped parsley, and serve them up next to roast beef, fried chicken, or whatever you had on the table that night. It was not flashy, but back in the day, that was the whole point. Simple, affordable, filling, and easy to dress up with ingredients straight from your garden or pantry. You would find recipes like this tucked in the pages of faded cookbooks from the 1930s to the 70s, passed along at potlucks and family dinners. Buttered parsley potatoes were proof that you did not need much to make a side dish feel complete. They soaked up gravy, balanced out heavier meals, and stretched your groceries farther when money was tight. These days, they have slipped off most dinner tables, but back then, a bowl of buttery potatoes meant you brought comfort, simplicity, and just a little bit of pride to the meal. Cane skimmings. Syrup bread turned what many would discard into a sweet treasure of the southern sugarcane fields. During the fall harvest, syrup makers skimmed the frothy foam that rose as cane juice boiled down into dark syrup. Rather than waste this flavorful byproduct, grandmothers folded it into quick bread batter made from cornmeal, flour, and fresh farm eggs. Baked until golden, the loaf emerged fragrant with a deep caramel note and a hint of the fields where the cane grew. Each slice carried the essence of the harvest and the ingenuity of cooks who valued every drop of sweetness. Served with butter or eaten plain, it provided a treat that celebrated the end of long days of work in the mill. Cane skimming's syrup bread reflects a culture of resourcefulness and respect for the gifts of the land, proving that nothing gathered by patient hands was ever truly wasted when a grandmother's kitchen stood ready to capture its flavor. Coca-Cola salad was one of the quirkiest dishes to grace Southern church gatherings and potluck tables. Made with cherry gelatin, canned fruit, nuts, and a splash of Coca-Cola, it was sweet, fizzy, and colorful enough to make children smile. Housewives loved serving it because it looked fun and modern, especially when molded into rings or squares. In an era when gelatin salads were fashionable, adding Coca-Cola gave it a Southern twist, marrying tradition with novelty. It was usually served as a side dish, though its sweetness often pushed it into dessert territory. Families remembered it fondly as part of Sunday suppers or holiday spreads where creativity was more important than convention. While strange to modern eyes, Coca-Cola salad was a reminder of how cooks made do with what they had and added a bit of flair to everyday meals. Over time, its popularity fizzled out as tastes shifted and gelatin salads fell from grace. Today, it survives only in nostalgic recipe cards, a relic of mid-century Southern kitchens. Rice pudding once had a different place at the table than it does today, often served as a side dish alongside meat rather than just a dessert. Made with rice, milk, sugar, and eggs, It was baked until soft and creamy, sometimes flavored with cinnamon or raisins. Its sweetness was mild enough that it could pair with savory foods, acting more like a filler than a treat. Housewives appreciated how it made use of leftover rice, ensuring nothing was wasted. The dish was inexpensive, warm, and satisfying, which made it popular during cold months. Children often loved the creamy texture and gentle flavor, while adults valued it as a practical way to stretch meals further. Over time, rice pudding shifted firmly into the dessert category, losing its role as a dinner companion. Today, it is rarely remembered as anything other than a sweet treat, but once it was an important side that proved how flexibility in cooking helped families make the most of their resources. Curried eggplant cubes reflected the decade's curiosity with global flavors, even if they were adapted into very simple home versions. Eggplant was chopped into cubes, sautéed in oil, and tossed with curry powder until the pieces turned golden and fragrant. It was usually served warm alongside chicken or lamb, adding an exotic note to otherwise traditional meals. Housewives liked it because it made use of an inexpensive vegetable while giving the impression of sophistication. For adventurous families, it felt like a small culinary trip without leaving the dining room. The mild curry flavor was tempered with onions or garlic, ensuring it was not too strong for children. It was an approachable way to introduce spice into a table that often leaned on casseroles and creamed vegetables. Curried eggplant cubes might seem dated now, but back then they symbolized the changing tastes of America, where international seasonings were starting to trickle into kitchens. It was humble but exciting, and it gave weeknight dinners a spark of variety. Watermelon and feta salad was a refreshing and unexpected combination that paired juicy, sweet watermelon chunks with crumbly, salty feta cheese. This side dish gained popularity as a summer staple in mid-century America and appeared in some Betty Crocker cookbooks as a light, flavorful contrast to heavier meals. The sweet, watery texture of the watermelon provided a cooling effect, while the feta added richness and a salty punch that balanced the fruit's natural sweetness. Often garnished with fresh mint or a drizzle of lemon juice, this salad offered a vibrant mix of flavors and colors on the plate. It was a perfect picnic or barbecue side, celebrated for its simplicity and its ability to refresh the palate. The unexpected pairing showcased the inventive spirit of vintage cooking, blending sweet and savory in a way that still delights today. Watermelon and feta salad remains a nostalgic reminder of sunny days and casual gatherings around the table. Hoppin' John with hog jowl was once a sacred New Year's tradition across the South, carrying both flavor and folklore. Made with black-eyed peas, rice, and smoky pork, it was believed to bring good luck and prosperity for the year ahead. Hog jowl, a fatty cut from the pig's cheek, was inexpensive and widely available, making it ideal for those with little money. Families simmered it with peas until the broth turned rich, then served it over rice for a dish that stretched to feed everyone at the table. Beyond sustenance, Hoppin' John embodied hope, tying the start of the year to faith in better days. Children often joined in the ritual, even if they disliked the peas, because skipping the dish felt like tempting fate. Today, many Southerners skip the hog jowl altogether or abandon the dish entirely, replacing it with more modern meals. But the original carried a weight that went far beyond its ingredients. Forgotten now, Hoppin' John with hog jowl tells a story about survival, culture, and the power of tradition to sustain the spirit. Ground pea stew highlighted a southern ingredient known to few outside Georgia, where native ground peas grew wild in sandy soil. These small legumes, cousins of the peanut, were simmered slowly with onions, salt pork, and a touch of pepper until tender and rich. Grandmothers prized them for their nutty flavor and the way they thickened a broth into a meal that warmed and satisfied. Harvesting ground peas required patience, and children often helped dig the plants from the earth, learning to respect the hidden bounty of the fields. The finished stew carried a subtle sweetness and a hearty texture that made it a favorite for cold evenings or after church suppers. Served with hot cornbread, it demonstrated how regional knowledge and careful cooking could create flavors unknown to outsiders. Ground pea stew remains a symbol of Southern diversity in ingredients and the intimate connection between family kitchens and the wild landscapes that sustained them. Shoestring potato casserole was one of those dishes that could only have existed in the middle of the 20th century, when canned potato sticks were considered both modern and exciting. Housewives layered the crunchy sticks over casseroles made with soups, vegetables, and scraps of meat, baking it all together until the top was golden and crisp. The texture was the main draw, offering a salty crunch that made even the plainest base taste special. Children often loved it because the topping reminded them of snack food, while adults appreciated that it disguised otherwise humble ingredients. It showed up at potlucks and church suppers, where its unusual crunch made it stand out among creamier sides. As fresh produce and homemade recipes reclaimed kitchens, the idea of topping casseroles with canned sticks fell out of favor. Today, the dish has virtually disappeared, remembered mostly in old cookbooks and family memories. Shoestring potato casserole was quirky, thrifty, and satisfying, proof of how creativity with convenience foods once defined the American family table. Prune whip mold was a dessert-like side dish that found its way onto many 1970s tables. Prunes were stewed until soft, whipped into a light puree, and folded with gelatin and whipped cream. The mixture was poured into molds and chilled until it set, creating a delicate, airy texture. The flavor was sweet yet mild, offering a way to enjoy fruit in a new and interesting form. It was often served in slices or scoops, sometimes topped with extra cream or nuts. Housewives relied on prune whip mold because it was easy to prepare, inexpensive, and could be made ahead of time for gatherings. It appealed especially to adults who appreciated its subtle sweetness and lightness after heavy main dishes. Prune whip mold carried the same charm as other gelatin-based recipes of the era, with the bonus of feeling wholesome thanks to the fruit base. Though it has nearly disappeared from menus today, it once held a firm place as a creative, thrifty, and surprisingly elegant dish for families and guests alike. Tomato aspic was a unique savory gelatin dish that combined tomatoes, onions, and herbs set into clear aspic molds, offering a refreshing and visually striking side. This vintage recipe was popular in mid-20th century America, often featured in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an elegant yet approachable addition to the meal. The aspic's firm, jelly-like texture held the fresh tomato chunks and fragrant herbs suspended in a flavorful, savory gelatin. Served chilled, tomato aspic provided a cool contrast to warm mains and added a touch of sophistication to dinner parties and holiday spreads. The dish's translucent nature made for a colorful presentation that impressed guests and delighted the eyes. Its mix of tangy tomato flavor and subtle herbal notes created a palate-pleasing experience that was both light and satisfying. Tomato aspic is a nostalgic reminder of a time when gelatin dishes were celebrated for their creativity and flair. Spinach timbales were a dish that made vegetables feel like something grand. Grandma would mix cooked spinach with eggs, cream, and a handful of breadcrumbs, pour the mixture into small molds, and bake them until they puffed and set. The result was a delicate custard-like mound that held its shape and tasted rich and savory. It looked fancy, but was often made from leftovers or frozen spinach, which made it even more impressive. These little timballs were served warm with a drizzle of cheese sauce or gravy and were a regular part of dinner parties or special Sunday meals. They had that old-fashioned air of formality that came from caring about presentation, even when money was tight. Spinach timbales were quiet showstoppers, the kind of dish that made people stop and take note without saying a word. They are rarely seen today outside of vintage cookbooks or culinary schools, but for a time they were proof that vegetables could be elegant too. Maybe we would all eat more greens if they were served like this again. Golden Glow carrot salad was one of those bright, zesty side dishes that added color and crunch to dinner tables, especially when meals were built around whatever you could grow or stretch from the pantry. You would take shredded carrots, mix them with lemon-flavored gelatin, and fold in crushed pineapple for sweetness, letting the whole thing set into a glossy, citrusy mold that practically glowed on the plate. It sounds unusual now, but back then, Molded salads were a potluck favorite, and this one stood out for its bold color and refreshing bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, easy to throw together, and made even the humblest meals feel a little more special. Golden glow carrot salad showed up at Sunday suppers, holiday spreads, and backyard picnics, sitting proudly next to roast chicken, casseroles, or fried pork chops. Its stretched ingredients added brightness to heavy plates and gave meals that cheerful, homemade touch. You hardly see it now, but once upon a time, this glowing salad was a quiet symbol of kitchen creativity and making do with simple, practical ingredients. Tomato aspic was once a staple at luncheons, garden clubs, and church suppers across the South, though it baffles many people today. Made with tomato juice, gelatin, and seasonings like onion or celery salt, it was poured into molds and chilled until firm. Often, it was served sliced or cubed alongside salads, meats, or even sandwiches. For many women hosting luncheons in the early to mid-20th century, tomato aspic signaled refinement and creativity. The bright red color gave plates a decorative touch, and the savory tang paired well with richer dishes. Some families enjoyed it with mayonnaise or cream cheese to soften the bite, while others garnished it with herbs. While the idea of tomato gelatin may sound unappealing today, back then it was viewed as sophisticated and practical, especially in hot climates where chilled dishes offered relief. Tomato aspic was not born of hardship, but of style, showing how Southern cooks followed national trends while adapting them with local ingredients. Its absence today marks a shift away from elaborate molded salads toward simpler fare. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes captured the warmth of the hearth in a method older than most family recipes. Grandmothers nestled whole sweet potatoes directly into the glowing embers of a wood fireplace, letting the natural sugars slowly caramelize under the blackened skin. The potatoes emerged tender and smoky, their soft orange flesh carrying a depth of flavor that no modern oven could quite match. Children gathered near the fire, eager for the moment when the potatoes were lifted out with long tongs and wrapped in clean cloths to cool just enough for holding. A simple sprinkle of salt or a pat of fresh butter was all that was needed to turn the humble root into a winter night feast. The process required patience, but little else, making it a perfect example of turning necessity into comfort. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes evoke evenings filled with crackling firelight, family stories, and the quiet satisfaction of food cooked by the heart and by the hearth itself. Stewed rhubarb was once a spring and summer side dish that added tart brightness to otherwise heavy meals. Families harvested the tall red stalks from backyard gardens, slicing and simmering them with sugar until they softened into a tangy sauce. It was served warm or chilled, sometimes alongside meat dishes, but just as often spooned over bread or biscuits. The sharp flavor made it stand out, providing a contrast to the rich, fatty foods that dominated dinner tables. Housewives valued it as a seasonal staple that could be prepared quickly and stretched into several meals. Children found its tartness surprising, though a generous amount of sugar helped make it more appealing. Stewed rhubarb fit perfectly into a culture of seasonal eating when what grew in the garden dictated what was on the plate. Over time, rhubarb became tied mainly to pies and desserts, pushing stewed versions aside. Yet for many families, it was once an essential spring side dish that brought freshness and vitality to everyday suppers. Avocado pineapple salad was one of those curious combinations that only the 1970s could have produced. Avocado halves were scooped and filled with pineapple chunks, then topped with a dollop of mayonnaise or sometimes cottage cheese. The result was a creamy, tangy, and slightly sweet side dish that looked exotic at potlucks and luncheons. Housewives appreciated it because avocados were gaining popularity and pineapple, whether canned or fresh, was inexpensive and readily available. The pairing of fruit with creamy dressings was a trend that defined the decade, and avocado pineapple salad fit neatly into that mold. Guests were often intrigued by the unusual combination, and while some loved it, others hesitated at the blend of flavors. Still, it represented the playful experimentation of the time, when food was as much about presentation and novelty as it was about taste. Avocado pineapple salad, though nearly lost today, stands as a snapshot of a decade that thrived on curiosity and creativity at the table. Broiled grapefruit with brown sugar was a simple yet elegant side dish that warmed many hearts and kitchens. Halved grapefruits were topped generously with brown sugar, then broiled until caramelized, creating a slightly crisp, golden crust that contrasted with the juicy, tart fruit beneath. The result was a warm, zesty bite that balanced sweetness and tang in a way that felt both indulgent and healthy. This dish appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a bright finish to heavier meals or as a breakfast treat for those wanting something fresh yet comforting. The caramelized sugar added depth and a subtle crunch, turning humble grapefruit into a dessert-like delight. It was especially popular during winter, when citrus was in season and the warm oven created a cozy kitchen atmosphere. The blend of warmth, tartness, and sweet caramel made this side dish memorable, and it often became a topic of conversation at the family table. It was a wonderful example of how simple ingredients could be transformed into something special with just a broiler and a little patience. Stuffed baked onions were the kind of dish that made you think Grandma knew a little magic. She would peel and hollow out big yellow onions, then fill them with a warm mixture of breadcrumbs, herbs, and maybe a bit of sausage if meat was on hand. Then she would roast them until the outside was soft and golden and the center bubbled with flavor. The smell alone would bring people into the kitchen. It was impressive without trying too hard. Just an onion, transformed into something elegant. You might find them at a Sunday dinner or as a side for a special roast. They looked like something out of a restaurant, but were made from the humblest ingredients. Stuffed onions stretched the grocery budget and elevated whatever else was on the plate. You would cut through the tender layers with a fork and get a mix of sweetness and savory warmth. It is hard to imagine a time when onions took center stage like that, but Grandma knew how to make the most of what she had. Today, we just chop them and toss them in a pan. Back then, they were stars. Pear salad with cheese and mayo might sound like the punchline to a joke now, but once upon a time it was a Southern classic that filled old cookbooks and family tables with its quirky, sweet, savory charm. You would take canned pear halves, top them with grated cheese, usually sharp cheddar, and add a dollop of mayonnaise right in the center, sometimes finishing it off with a cherry on top. It was a strange little salad, but folks loved how it balanced salty, creamy, and sweet flavors all on one plate. This dish came straight from the pages of vintage community cookbooks, the kind passed around at church gatherings, luncheons, and backyard picnics all across the South. Pear salad earned its spot at the table because it used affordable pantry staples, dressed up the meal, and stretched ingredients when fresh produce was hard to come by. You might not find it at potlucks today, but back then, seeing those glossy pears and shredded cheese meant your hostess brought out her best, even if the combination raised a few eyebrows. It was strange, it was thrifty, and it was pure vintage comfort on a plate. Chinquapin chestnut dressing showcased a tiny nut once abundant in southern forests, but nearly lost by the mid-20th century. Grandmothers gathered the small chestnuts, cracking their thin shells to reveal sweet, dense meat that added depth to traditional bread stuffing. Mixed with crumbled cornbread, onions, and sage, the dressing baked to a golden crust that perfumed the kitchen with warm, earthy notes. Because the Chinquapin harvest was unpredictable, this dish was reserved for holidays or special Sunday dinners, making it a treasured seasonal event. Children joined the harvest, their pockets filling with the glossy brown nuts that hid beneath fallen leaves. Each bite of the finished dressing carried the flavor of autumn woods and the satisfaction of a successful forage. Chinquapin chestnut dressing stands today as a memory of forests once thick with these small treasures and of the grandmothers who taught that the rarest ingredients often come from careful observation and the patient work of many small hands. Cracklin' cornbread was once the pride of farmhouse kitchens, combining the richness of pork with the staple of cornmeal. Cracklings, or crispy bits of pork skin and fat, were folded into cornbread batter before baking. The result was a savory, hearty bread with bursts of crunch and flavor in every bite. For families, it was a way to stretch pork trimmings and ensure nothing went to waste. Served hot from cast iron pans, it paired perfectly with beans, greens, or stews, rounding out meals with rustic comfort. Children grew up associating its smell with warmth and family dinners. Cracklin' cornbread carried cultural weight, embodying thrift and creativity in rural kitchens. Today, plain cornbread dominates, leaving the cracklin' version nearly forgotten except in certain regions. Its decline reflects broader changes in diets and preferences, as pork fat gave way to lighter cooking. Still, it remains a powerful reminder of how Southern cooks celebrated resourcefulness. Cracklin' cornbread was never just bread, it was heritage in every crumb. Mushroom rice pilaf was one of those dishes that showed just how much the 1970s leaned into casseroles as the answer for everything. Housewives would reach for canned mushrooms, pour them into rice, and simmer the whole thing with bouillon cubes until the flavor seeped through. Some would stop there and serve it straight from the stove, but the more popular approach was to pour it into a casserole dish and bake it until the top formed a crust. It was one of those meals that felt just fancy enough for a potluck without costing much or demanding complicated work. The canned mushrooms gave it that earthy taste, and when you added in the richness of broth, it seemed like something better than just plain rice. For families, it was filling and easy to reheat, which is why it showed up on dinner tables again and again. Mushroom rice pilaf sat quietly next to roasts or chicken, and sometimes it even became the star on its own. Today, it has mostly faded from memory, but back then it was a dependable comfort that everyone knew how to make. Fried okra bites were a popular Southern-inspired side dish made by breading and frying bite-sized pieces of tender okra until golden and crispy. This dish was celebrated in Betty Crocker cookbooks for its crunchy texture and distinct Southern charm, bringing a satisfying crispness to the dinner table. The okra was sliced into small rounds, dipped in seasoned cornmeal or flour mixtures, then fried in hot oil to create a crunchy exterior that contrasted with the okra's soft, slightly mucilaginous inside. Fried okra bites were a favorite at family barbecues, picnics, and holiday feasts, often served alongside fried chicken and other comfort foods. Their crispy coating and mild flavor made them a hit with kids and adults alike. This dish represented mid-century America's love for Southern flavors and the creative use of regional ingredients in everyday cooking. Fried okra bites remain a nostalgic reminder of communal gatherings filled with hearty, flavorful food. Breaded eggplant rounds were a summer favorite that tasted like fried sunshine. Grandma would slice eggplants into thick coins, dip them in egg and breadcrumbs, sometimes with a bit of cornmeal, and fry them until golden and crisp. They were salty on the outside, creamy on the inside, and just hearty enough to stand in for meat when money was tight. You could serve them on their own, with tomato sauce, or tucked into a sandwich with melted cheese. They were messy to make and disappeared faster than she could fry them. The best ones were fresh from the garden, deep purple and still warm from the sun. Eggplant was not always a kid favorite, but this dish changed minds quickly. It was comfort food with a little bit of crunch and a lot of history. Today, eggplant shows up more in global recipes than in Grandma's style of home cooking. But back then, it was a clever way to make something simple feel satisfying. 3 bean molded salad was one of those curious creations from vintage cookbooks that made vegetables and gelatin collide in the strangest way. You would take the classic 3-bean salad, green beans, wax beans, kidney beans, and suspend the whole thing in lemon or lime-flavored gelatin, set it in a mold, and proudly serve it at potlucks or family dinners. Back in the 1950s and 60s, molded salads were a rite of passage in every community cookbook, and this one was no different. It looked fancy, stretched pantry staples, and made sure not a single bean went to waste. People loved it for the bright colors, wobbly texture, and how it sat proudly next to roast meats or casseroles. It might sound a little off-putting now, but back then, molded salads were considered practical and even impressive. This one in particular packed protein, vegetables, and a little retro flair all in one strange, shimmering dish. You might not see it outside of vintage recipe cards today, but once upon a time, it was the talk of every potluck. Wild violet syrup pancakes brought the magic of early spring flowers to the breakfast table in a swirl of color and fragrance. Grandmothers gathered handfuls of fresh violet blossoms when meadows turned purple after the first warm rains. The petals were gently simmered with sugar and lemon until the syrup glowed a deep amethyst and carried the delicate scent of the season. Poured over fluffy pancakes hot from the griddle, the syrup added a floral sweetness that transformed an ordinary morning meal into a celebration of spring itself. Children delighted in the surprising color that tinted the pancakes a faint lavender as the syrup soaked in. Because violets bloom briefly, the tradition encouraged families to savor the moment and to treasure the fleeting beauty of nature. Wild violet syrup pancakes remain a testament to the Southern grandmother's ability to turn the simplest gifts of the field into a breakfast that tasted like fresh air and the promise of longer, warmer days to come. Scuppernong grape jelly was a staple of homesteads across the South, made from wild, bronze-colored grapes native to the region. Families harvested scuppernongs in late summer, cooking them down with sugar to create a sweet, musky jelly. It was spread thick on biscuits, cornbread, or fresh loaves, bringing the taste of the season into the pantry. Children often helped pick the grapes, staining their hands and lips as they filled baskets. For many, it was less about the jelly itself and more about the ritual of gathering and preserving together. This homemade preserve tied households to the land, with each jar holding the essence of place and memory. Scuppernong jelly was also shared among neighbors, reflecting community bonds built around food. Today, it has become rare, replaced by store-bought jams and the fading of foraging traditions. Its decline marks a quiet loss of self-sufficiency and regional pride. Forgotten on most tables, it remains a sweet symbol of Southern ingenuity and heritage. Cabbage slaw with vinegar dressing was the tangy counterpart to the creamy coleslaws that would later dominate family tables. It relied on shredded cabbage, onions, and sometimes peppers, tossed with vinegar, sugar, and a touch of oil. The result was a crisp, refreshing side dish that paired perfectly with meats, especially barbecue or fried chicken. Families appreciated how inexpensive it was, since cabbage was cheap, easy to grow, and stored well. Vinegar-based dressings also kept the slaw longer than creamier alternatives, which made it practical for picnics, potlucks, and outdoor gatherings. It carried a sharper flavor that cut through rich main dishes, balancing plates with brightness and crunch. Children might have preferred creamier versions, but vinegar slaw was a staple across many regions before mayonnaise-based salads took over. Its presence at community gatherings and dinner tables showed how thrift and tradition guided mid-century cooking. Though overshadowed today, cabbage slaw with vinegar dressing was once the go-to side dish that stood as a refreshing, reliable classic. Lima bean supreme was a side dish that took a humble legume and dressed it up for special occasions. Lima beans were simmered until tender, then folded into a creamy sauce often flavored with butter, milk, and a touch of nutmeg. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs, and baked until golden and bubbling. It transformed the often overlooked lima bean into something rich and comforting, with a texture that appealed even to those who usually avoided them. Housewives appreciated it because it was economical, yet felt dressed up enough to bring to potlucks or serve at Sunday dinners. Children were coaxed into eating their vegetables when lima bean supreme appeared because the creamy sauce softened the flavors and made it more approachable. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the casserole culture of the 1970s, blending thrift with a little indulgence. Today it is hard to find, but it once stood as proof that even the plainest vegetables could be made into something memorable. Celery and walnut salad was a classic side that brought crunch and creaminess together in perfect harmony. Crisp celery stalks were sliced thin and mixed with crunchy walnuts, then tossed in a light mayonnaise or yogurt dressing, creating a refreshing contrast in textures. This salad was often a staple in Betty Crocker cookbooks, celebrated for its ease and the satisfying bite it added to any meal. The cool, slightly bitter celery balanced the rich, buttery walnuts, while the creamy dressing tied it all together with a touch of tang. It was a favored side for holiday dinners and everyday meals alike, offering a healthy option that was still indulgent enough to feel like a treat. The nutty flavor of walnuts brought depth, and the salad's pale green hues added a fresh pop of color to the dinner plate. Its simple yet elegant nature made it beloved by home cooks seeking something light and wholesome to complement heartier mains. Succotash with lima beans was not just a dish, it was a Depression-era survival tool that somehow made it into Grandma's regular rotation. Sweet corn and soft lima beans were simmered together in a little butter or cream, sometimes with bell peppers or onions tossed in for good measure. It was filling, cheap, and surprisingly nutritious, which made it perfect for families trying to stretch every last dime. Succotash had deep roots too, traced back to Native American cooking, and became especially popular in the South and Midwest. If your grandma had a victory garden, you probably had succotash at least once a week. It was served warm, spooned right from the pot, and though it was never flashy, it was honest food. A dish that said, "We have enough to share." Some people added bacon or ham to punch it up, others kept it plain and let the vegetables speak. But the core recipe stayed the same for generations. These days, succotash barely makes an appearance outside of history books or heritage festivals. Scalloped cabbage bake was the kind of side dish that stretched a head of cabbage farther than you thought possible. And it came straight out of those old community cookbooks where frugal comfort food was king. You would slice the cabbage, soften it in boiling water, then bake it in layers with creamy sauce, breadcrumbs, and sometimes a little cheese if you had extra on hand. It sounds simple, but when it came bubbling out of the oven, golden on top and rich underneath, it turned cabbage into pure comfort food. Families leaned on dishes like this during the Great Depression and World War II, when ingredients were scarce and every meal had to go the distance. Scalloped cabbage bake filled plates at church suppers, potlucks, and Sunday dinners all across America, sitting proudly next to ham, roast chicken, or casseroles. It might not win any beauty contests now, but back then it meant a warm, filling meal made with care. In tough times, even the humblest cabbage could be turned into something worth gathering around the table for. Black walnut vinegar pie endures as a testament to the resourcefulness of Southern grandmothers who knew how to transform humble ingredients into a sophisticated dessert that lingered in memory long after the last slice disappeared. Sheep sorrel spring soup welcomed the first bright greens of the year with a flavor that was tart and refreshing after the heavy meals of winter. Southern grandmothers gathered tender sorrel leaves from meadows and fence lines just as church bells finished ringing on early spring Sundays. The lemony taste of the wild plants needed little more than a simmer in light chicken broth with onions and a splash of fresh cream to create a soup that sparkled with natural freshness. Children often joined in the hunt for the soft green leaves, learning to recognize the arrow-shaped plants among the grasses. The soup's gentle tang awakened palates that had grown accustomed to preserved vegetables and root cellars during cold months. Families savored each spoonful, knowing that the short season would pass quickly and the tender sorrel would soon grow tough under the stronger sun. Sheep sorrel spring soup remains a lively reminder of the importance of foraging knowledge and the simple joy of gathering food directly from the earth at the very start of a southern spring. Cane syrup pie was a dessert deeply rooted in Southern sugar heritage, reflecting both thrift and sweetness. Made by blending cane syrup with eggs, butter, and a simple crust, it created a pie that was rich yet affordable. For families, it was an accessible treat when refined sugar was too costly or scarce. The deep, molasses-like flavor of cane syrup gave it a distinct taste that stood apart from other pies. Children eagerly anticipated slices at Sunday dinners or holidays, associating it with comfort and celebration. Adults valued it for how it stretched inexpensive pantry staples into something that felt indulgent. Cane syrup pie also carried cultural weight, tying households to the sugarcane fields that defined much of the Southern economy. Today, it is rarely baked, its bold flavor and simplicity overshadowed by modern desserts. Forgotten in most kitchens, it remains a reminder of Southern resilience. Cane syrup pie was more than a sweet ending. It was a testament to resourcefulness. Baked rice and raisins was a thrifty side dish that blurred the line between savory and sweet, offering families both comfort and frugality. Rice was baked with milk, sugar, and raisins, creating a lightly sweetened dish that could sit alongside meats as easily as it could finish a meal. Housewives liked it because it stretched inexpensive staples into something that felt satisfying and filling. It required little effort, yet it emerged from the oven warm and golden, with raisins adding bursts of sweetness. Children often looked forward to it because it tasted closer to dessert than vegetables. For adults, it was a versatile side that paired with pork or chicken just as well as it could stand on its own. The dish appeared frequently in community cookbooks, passed down as a dependable recipe for lean times. Over the years, as meals became more specialized, baked rice and raisins faded away. Still, it remains a symbol of mid-century thrift, proving that creativity could transform humble staples into family favorites. Radish and orange salad was a curious pairing that reflected the playful experimentation of the decade. Thinly sliced radishes were layered with orange segments, creating a colorful combination of sharp spice and sweet citrus. A light dressing of vinegar or honey was sometimes drizzled on top, balancing the flavors. It was crisp, refreshing, and visually striking, making it a standout at luncheons or dinners. Housewives served it because it was inexpensive and unusual, giving them a dish that guests would not forget. The salad offered contrast to the creamy casseroles and gelatin molds that filled most tables. Children might have resisted the peppery bite of radishes, but adults often appreciated the sophistication of the pairing. Radish and orange salad carried a sense of lightness that made it especially welcome during the warmer months. Though it vanished quickly from popularity, it once stood as a bold reflection of the 1970s willingness to push flavor boundaries. Green bean almondine was a classic vegetable side that combined fresh green beans sautéed with butter, garlic, and toasted almonds for a nutty, buttery flavor. This elegant dish often appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an easy way to elevate simple green beans into a special occasion side. The green beans were cooked until tender but still crisp, then quickly tossed in a skillet with melted butter and minced garlic to infuse them with rich, savory notes. Toasted almonds added a delightful crunch and nutty aroma, making every bite a perfect balance of textures. Green bean almondine was popular at dinner parties and holiday tables, praised for its sophisticated yet approachable flavor. It showcased mid-century home cooking's love for combining fresh vegetables with buttery richness and a crunchy finish. This side remains a nostalgic favorite for its bright green color, satisfying bite, and warm, nutty undertones that complement a wide variety of main dishes. Wilted lettuce salad sounds like something gone wrong, but in Grandma's kitchen, it was magic. She would start with tender leaf lettuce, picked fresh if she had a garden, and pour a hot dressing made from bacon drippings, vinegar, sugar, and salt right over the top. The leaves would soften slightly, just enough to take on the tangy, savory warmth of the dressing. Sliced onions or hard-boiled eggs were sometimes added depending on the season. It was best eaten immediately, while still warm, and it felt like a treat even though it was made from next to nothing. The flavor was bold, salty-sweet, and impossible to forget. Wilted lettuce was especially common in the Appalachian South and the Midwest, where thrift met tradition in the best ways. It turned plain greens into something special without needing cheese, croutons, or bottled dressing. These days, people want their salads cold and crisp, but there was something deeply satisfying about a bowl of warm greens straight from Grandma's hands. Macaroni and tomatoes was the forgotten side that kept dinner plates full when grocery budgets were stretched thin. You would boil macaroni, toss it with stewed tomatoes, a pat of butter, and maybe onions or cheese if you had extra. It was not glamorous, but it got the job done. You could find this simple pasta side in old community cookbooks from the 40s through the 70s, tucked between casserole recipes and Jell-O molds. Families loved it because it used pantry staples, cost little, and made meals stretch farther. It showed up next to pork chops, meatloaf, or whatever leftovers you had. Macaroni and tomatoes was the quiet hero of the table, filling bellies when money was tight. You do not see it much now, but in its day, it was a practical filling side that showed how far folks could go with a box of pasta and a can of tomatoes. Cured gizzard confit transformed a humble poultry part into a delicacy through slow, deliberate cooking that celebrated thrift and flavor. Grandmothers cleaned the gizzards carefully, seasoning them with salt, pepper, and garden herbs before submerging them in rendered fat from the same bird. Over hours of gentle heat, the tough muscle relaxed into silky tenderness while absorbing every note of seasoning. Once cooled, the gizzards were stored in their own fat, ready to be crisped in a hot skillet or served cold with pickled vegetables. This method ensured nothing from the chicken went to waste and provided a ready source of protein through busy weeks. Guests were often surprised by the rich taste that rivaled more expensive cuts of meat, proving that economy and elegance could share the same plate. Cured gizzard confit stands as a testament to the Southern grandmother's ability to elevate the simplest ingredients into something extraordinary with patience, care, and a deep respect for the whole bird that nourished the family table. Chess pie with vinegar was one of the South's thriftiest desserts, proving that even the poorest households could enjoy something sweet. Made from sugar, eggs, butter, and a splash of vinegar, it baked into a custard-like pie with a tangy edge. The vinegar cut the sweetness, balancing the richness of the filling and making it unique. Families loved chess pie because the ingredients were always on hand, no matter how tight the budget. It was served at Sunday dinners, holidays, and gatherings, offering comfort and familiarity. While fancier pies required fruit or nuts, chess pie was humble and practical, making it beloved across generations. Children often remembered it as the dessert of their childhood, while adults prized it for its simplicity. Today, it is less common outside of heritage cookbooks, replaced by more modern sweets. Chess pie with vinegar stands as a symbol of Depression-era resilience, turning pantry basics into something remarkable. Forgotten now, it remains a dish worth remembering for both its flavor and history. Ambrosia salad was a dish that carried with it the unmistakable mark of church basements and Southern tables. Made from canned fruit cocktail, shredded coconut, and a generous handful of marshmallows, it was less a salad and more a sweet, creamy treat disguised as a side dish. It often appeared at potlucks, picnics, and Sunday gatherings where it sat proudly in glass bowls that showed off its bright colors. For many families, ambrosia was a symbol of hospitality, a way to offer something sweet, even when dessert was not planned. The canned fruit made it affordable and available year-round, while the marshmallows made it especially popular with children. It was refreshing, easy to prepare, and flexible enough to include extra touches like whipped cream or nuts if the pantry allowed. Over time, its sugary character fell out of favor as tastes moved toward healthier or more modern sides. Still, ambrosia salad once defined togetherness, turning even the simplest meal into something worth remembering. Celery crown salad was as much a visual piece as it was a food because the presentation mattered almost more than the taste. Housewives would take celery stalks, chill them until crisp, then fan them into the shape of a crown on a serving platter. The stalks would be held together with toothpicks or bands and then dressed with mayonnaise or a cheese-based sauce to add flavor. Sometimes pimentos or olives were added for color, turning the plain green into something more dramatic. It was refreshing, crunchy, and light, which made it a common sight on buffet tables crowded with heavier casseroles. The 1970s were a time when appearance at the table held value, and celery crown salad looked like something made with care even if it was simple to assemble. It offered a cool bite that balanced the richness of other dishes, and children often picked at it because of its playful shape. Though rarely made today, it once brought a sense of occasion to everyday celery. Ranch-style baked potatoes were a crowd pleaser on many mid-century American dinner tables. These potatoes were baked to a fluffy perfection, then smothered in a creamy ranch-flavored topping that brought a delightful mix of herbs and tangy zest. The ranch dressing blend, rich with buttermilk, garlic, and dill, made these spuds anything but ordinary. Imagine biting into a warm potato where the skin is slightly crisp and the inside bursts with smooth, flavorful goodness that dances on your tongue. This side dish was perfect for family dinners or potlucks, offering comforting familiarity with a touch of indulgence. Ranch-style baked potatoes were not just about flavor, but also about warmth and homeliness, fitting seamlessly alongside classic meatloaf or roast chicken. The ease of preparation and the simple ingredients made this recipe a staple in many Betty Crocker cookbooks, cherished by home cooks who wanted to impress without spending hours in the kitchen. Whether served plain or with a sprinkle of extra cheese or chopped chives, this dish remains a nostalgic favorite for those who remember the days of vintage comfort food. Copper pennies were more than just a colorful dish. They were a reminder that simple vegetables could still feel dressed up when times were tight. These were sliced carrots marinated in a tangy sweet sauce made from vinegar, sugar, and sometimes just a dash of dry mustard. The recipe usually came from a stained card in Grandma's tin box, the kind she would pull out for church potlucks or Sunday suppers. You could serve them cold or slightly warm, and the flavor only got better after a night in the icebox. The bright orange color stood out on even the most modest dinner table, and they were easy to make in bulk with very little fuss. Canned carrots worked just fine if you had no fresh ones, which helped stretch this into leaner seasons. And while the name might sound silly now, anyone who grew up with them remembers how good they looked lined up beside the ham or roast. Some people even thought it was the one way they liked carrots. But somewhere along the way, this cheerful little side dish faded into memory, tucked between pages of cookbooks that no one opens anymore. Cottage cheese Jell-O salad was one of those curious creations that somehow became a potluck staple all across America. It mixed creamy cottage cheese with lemon or lime gelatin, and if that was not bold enough, people often added celery, grated carrots, or pineapple chunks. You would walk into a family reunion or church dinner in the 1940s, and there it was, wobbling in all its glory next to fried chicken or meatloaf. People loved it because it looked presentable, stretched ingredients, and felt like something special during tight grocery budgets. You might not see it on modern tables, but back then, molded salads were more than a trend. They were pure kitchen creativity when you had to make do. This one came straight from old community cookbooks with curled pages and faded ink, the kind passed down through families who knew how to stretch every dollar. Cypress knees. Stew drew its name and subtle flavor from the swampy roots of the cypress tree that lined bayou waters. Grandmothers simmered fresh fish, small shrimp, and local vegetables in a seasoned broth enriched with a few cleaned cypress knees, which released a gentle woodsy essence during cooking. The stew carried the spirit of the Louisiana wetlands, blending the sweetness of seafood with the mysterious aroma of the swamp. Served with crusty bread to soak up the broth, it warmed families after long days spent fishing or gathering along the water's edge. Children learned respect for the bayou as they watched elders harvest the knees carefully without harming the living trees. The dish reflected both reverence for nature and the inventive cooking that defined communities living close to the land. Cypress knees stew remains a rare and evocative taste of the Deep South, a recipe passed quietly from grandmother to grandchild as a celebration of place and patience. Sally Lunn bread was once the pride of many Southern kitchens, a golden loaf that balanced richness with simplicity. Unlike the quick cornbreads and biscuits that defined everyday suppers, this bread required patience. It was made with yeast, giving it a lofty rise and tender crumb, but it also had a subtle sweetness that came from sugar and butter folded into the dough. Families often reserved Sally Lunn for Sundays, holidays, or company because it demanded time and attention that could not always be spared during the Depression or lean years. The bread was baked in heavy pans, often cast iron, which gave it a crisp crust that contrasted with its soft interior. Its popularity stretched from Virginia to Kentucky, where it appeared at breakfast, sliced and spread with butter or sorghum molasses, and at dinner, served beside roasted meats. Today, it has nearly disappeared from tables, overshadowed by easier breads that require less effort. Yet Sally Lunn bread remains a reminder of how Southern cooks elevated simple ingredients into something elegant, transforming flour, eggs, and yeast into a loaf that symbolized hospitality and care. Succotash was one of the most enduring side dishes to come out of the Depression years, making use of ingredients that were cheap, plentiful, and filling. It combined corn and lima beans, simmered together in butter or drippings to create a simple but hearty dish. Many households kept canned corn and beans on hand, so succotash required little planning and could be pulled together quickly. It was both nutritious and practical, stretching small amounts of vegetables into something substantial enough to serve alongside meat or bread. Children might not have loved lima beans, but they ate succotash because it was always there, dependable and filling. The dish carried over into the 1940s and 1950s, often appearing at holiday tables alongside turkey or chicken. In some regions, variations added cream or peppers to give it more depth. By the late 20th century, succotash slipped from popularity, but for decades it was a comfort food that reminded families of resilience and thrift during leaner times. Golden Glow salad was another brightly colored creation that turned up at nearly every church gathering or family potluck. It was made with orange-flavored gelatin mixed with grated carrots and crushed pineapple, a combination that blended sweetness with a touch of vegetable crunch. Housewives would prepare it in large molds or pans and slice it into cubes or wedges, sometimes topping it with whipped cream or a creamy dressing. The bright orange color made it visually striking, earning its name as it seemed to glow under the lights of buffet tables. It was sweet enough that children loved it, but the carrots gave it the illusion of being healthy. Families considered it a salad even though it leaned more toward dessert, because gelatin salads were a category all their own in that decade. Golden Glow salad showed how creative cooks could get with inexpensive pantry items, turning 3 simple ingredients into a memorable side dish. Though it rarely appears today, its place in 1970s potluck culture was nearly guaranteed. Orange Jell-O salad was a shining star of many a mid-century dinner spread, bringing a burst of sunshine to the table. This side dish combined citrusy gelatin with crushed pineapple or mandarin oranges, offering a sweet and tangy profile that refreshed the palate between heavier courses. The translucent orange hue gleamed under the dining room light, hinting at the fruity delight within. It was common to find recipes in Betty Crocker cookbooks encouraging creative additions like mini marshmallows, shredded coconut, or chopped nuts for added texture. The cool, wobbly nature of the Jell-O made it a playful contrast to the warm, savory mains. This salad was often served chilled, providing a moment of lightness and joy during meals where meat and potatoes dominated. Kids loved it for its sweetness and fun texture, while adults appreciated the nostalgia it evoked. Its simplicity made it a go-to for busy home cooks, and its bright flavor profile helped lift spirits, especially during winter months. Orange Jell-O salad was truly a dessert and a side dish all wrapped in one delightful package. Harvard beets were the kind of side dish you either loved with all your heart or politely pushed around the plate. But back in Grandma's day, they were something special. Tender beets, simmered in a glossy, sweet and sour sauce made of sugar, vinegar, and a touch of butter or cornstarch for thickness. Sometimes cloves or allspice were added, giving them a spiced holiday feel that filled the room the moment they hit the stove. These beets had a deep ruby color that practically glowed in the bowl, and they were often served warm alongside pot roast or meatloaf. You would see them at church suppers, family holidays, or just because someone had canned a good harvest. They were a lesson in thrift, too, stretching garden beets through the winter with just a few pantry ingredients. People used to say Harvard beets were named after the university, but no one ever really cared. What mattered was that they gave even humble root vegetables a bit of elegance and shine. These days, you are more likely to see beets roasted with goat cheese than nestled in a sticky glaze. Celery Victor sounds like a recipe that came from a fancy hotel menu, but this marinated celery dish made its way into regular households thanks to those old cookbook collections in every drawer. It was as simple as boiling celery until tender, chilling it in broth or vinegar, and serving it up with herbs or hard-boiled eggs when you wanted to show off. You could find it at potlucks or holiday tables, dressed up to look fancier than it was. People back then knew how to stretch even the humblest ingredients into something worthy of company. Celery Victor turned plain celery into a crisp, tangy salad that felt like a proper side dish next to roasted meats or casseroles. It showed up in cookbooks throughout the 1930s and 40s, passed along at church suppers and family gatherings. Sourwood honey pone delivered the essence of Appalachian mountain summers in a simple yet unforgettable corn cake. Grandmothers blended fresh ground cornmeal with buttermilk and farm eggs, then stirred in a generous drizzle of rare sourwood honey gathered from high mountain hives. Baked in a cast iron skillet, the pone emerged with a golden crust and a moist crumb sweetened with the floral, slightly tangy notes of the honey. Families prize this treat because sourwood blooms for only a short season, making the honey a cherished ingredient that neighbors often traded like gold. Served warm with fresh butter, each slice carried the fragrance of mountain flowers and the warmth of hearth and home. Children savored every bite, aware that the next taste might be a year away. Sourwood honey pone remains a beloved memory of the Appalachian Hills, where natural bounty and careful timing combined to create a dish that was as fleeting as it was delicious. Pine bark stew was a rustic fish stew that once warmed the bellies of southern families living near rivers and coasts. Sometimes compared to Brunswick stew, pine bark stew used inexpensive fish like catfish or bream, simmered with potatoes, onions, and tomatoes until the broth grew hearty and thick. The name supposedly came from cooking the stew in large outdoor pots near piles of pine bark used for kindling. It was a communal dish, prepared in big batches for neighbors, hunters, or church gatherings where everyone contributed what they had. Cornbread or saltine crackers were served on the side to soak up the flavorful broth. For many working-class families, pine bark stew was survival food, stretching cheap fish and vegetables into something filling. Yet it carried a social meaning too, because it brought communities together in times of need and celebration. While hardly known outside of old fishing towns today, its memory lives on in stories told by grandparents. Its fading presence marks the loss of one more piece of Southern identity, rooted in resourcefulness and togetherness. Pineapple and cheese salad might sound strange to modern ears, but it was once a beloved mid-century favorite. A canned pineapple ring would be laid on a bed of lettuce, topped with a slice of sharp cheddar cheese, and finished with a dollop of mayonnaise. The combination of sweet, salty, and creamy flavors made it memorable, even if unusual. It was quick to prepare, colorful on the plate, and affordable since canned pineapple had become widely available by then. Children liked the sweetness of the fruit, while adults valued the contrast of cheese and tangy dressing. This dish often appeared at luncheons, bridge parties, and holiday tables, offering something that looked cheerful without requiring much effort. It reflected a time when canned goods were celebrated as modern conveniences that brought exotic tastes into ordinary kitchens. Though it has nearly vanished from menus today, pineapple and cheese salad once brightened countless tables, proving that simplicity and novelty could live side by side in one dish. Cheese soufflé casserole was a simplified take on the classic French soufflé, adapted for the practicality of American households. Instead of fussing with delicate timing and perfect rises, housewives would prepare a cheesy egg mixture and bake it in a casserole dish until puffy and golden. It offered the look and taste of a soufflé without the stress of collapse, making it ideal for potlucks and family dinners. The dish carried a rich, savory flavor that paired well with salads, meats, or even just bread. It was hearty enough to act as a main dish, but usually played the role of a side, standing proudly among other casseroles of the era. For families who wanted to bring something impressive to gatherings, cheese soufflé casserole delivered both taste and reliability. Children liked its creamy texture, while adults appreciated the sense of European flair without complicated cooking. Though the soufflé name gave it elegance, the casserole format made it accessible to everyone. Today it is almost forgotten, but in the 1970s it was a proud showcase of ingenuity. Baked sweet potato fries were a popular twist on the classic potato side, offering a sweet and savory alternative that baked to crispy perfection. Thinly sliced sweet potatoes were tossed in seasonings, often cinnamon, salt, or paprika, and baked until tender on the inside and slightly crisp on the edges. This healthier option appeared in many Betty Crocker cookbooks as a way to enjoy fries without deep frying, perfect for families seeking convenience and flavor. The natural sweetness of the potatoes paired beautifully with the warm spices, creating a comforting side that complemented both casual meals and special dinners. Baked sweet potato fries were easy to prepare and could be customized with various seasoning blends, making them versatile for many tastes. Their vibrant orange color brightened the plate, and the satisfying crunch made them a hit with kids and adults alike. These fries were a testament to how a simple vegetable could be transformed into a crowd-pleasing side that brought both nostalgia and a fresh twist to the table. Peas and pearl onions were a staple of wintertime cooking, especially when fresh vegetables were hard to come by. Grandma knew how to make something special out of pantry basics, and this dish was proof. Canned or frozen peas were gently warmed with tender pearl onions, often from a jar, and simmered in butter or a light cream sauce. The result was simple but comforting, with just enough sweetness and bite to sit perfectly alongside roast turkey or baked ham. You would see it on holiday tables, often scooped out of a deep ceramic dish with a worn wooden spoon. Some families added herbs like thyme or parsley, but the heart of the recipe never changed. It was about taking small, soft vegetables and giving them care, warmth, and just a bit of love. Peas and pearl onions did not shout for attention. They were the quiet kind of dish that stuck with you anyway. They are almost never made anymore, except by the rare home cook flipping through a dusty cookbook. But for the folks who remember, one bite can bring back a dozen meals from long ago. Corn pudding casserole was the side dish that made even the humblest dinner plate feel warm and complete. If you flipped through old recipe cards tucked behind flour jars, chances are this one was written in your grandmother's handwriting. It combined sweet corn, butter, eggs, and milk into a creamy bake that sat proudly next to roast ham or pork chops. It was easy, affordable, and filled bellies, making it a go-to for potlucks, church suppers, and holidays. The top baked up golden brown, the inside stayed soft and rich, and every bite reminded you how folks pulled meals together from what they had. Corn pudding casserole carried meals through tough times, earning its place in kitchens from the Depression to the 70s. You do not see it much now, but back then, that creamy baked corn meant comfort on a plate. Salt-rising bread with bacon drippings offered a rich and rustic loaf that captured the art of natural fermentation long before packaged yeast became common. Grandmothers began the process with a warm starter of cornmeal and scalded milk that sat overnight until wild bacteria created a distinct cheesy aroma. This slow magic produced a dense yet tender bread with a flavor unlike any other, slightly tangy and wonderfully fragrant. To heighten the richness, they brushed the baked loaf with hot bacon drippings, allowing the savory fat to seep into the crust and perfume the kitchen. Families enjoyed thick slices for breakfast with fresh butter, or alongside hearty soups for supper. The bread required patience and trust in tradition, a lesson in letting time and nature do the work. Children woke to the smell of the loaf cooling on the counter, a scent that spoke of skill and heritage. Salt-rising bread with bacon drippings remains a beloved emblem of Southern perseverance and the quiet mastery of age-old kitchen techniques. Chicken bog was a dish deeply rooted in South Carolina, where rice fields shaped both cuisine and culture. It was a hearty one-pot meal made by cooking chicken, rice, and smoked sausage together until the broth thickened into something almost stew-like. Families loved it because it stretched a single chicken to feed many mouths, with the rice absorbing all the rich flavors. In small towns, chicken bog was often served at gatherings, festivals, and family reunions, feeding crowds from big pots stirred outdoors. Children loved the soft texture, while adults appreciated its comfort and reliability. The name itself carried mystery, with many saying it came from the way the rice bogged down in the broth. Though once common, chicken bog has faded as fast food and boxed meals replaced slow cooking traditions. In its time, it was a dish of resilience, thrift, and togetherness. Forgotten now in many places, it survives only in pockets of South Carolina where families still pass the recipe down. Corn pudding was a baked custard that blended corn, eggs, and milk into a warm, comforting dish. Served most often during holidays, it became a tradition at Thanksgiving and Christmas tables across the country. The sweetness of the corn balanced the richness of the custard, creating something that felt both hearty and indulgent. Families looked forward to it because it transformed an ordinary pantry staple into something that felt festive. It was easy to make in large quantities, which made it practical for gatherings. Recipes varied from family to family, with some adding sugar for a dessert-like quality and others keeping it savory with butter and salt. The dish carried a homey nostalgia that tied generations together as many children grew up watching it come out of the oven golden brown. While it has faded from modern meals, corn pudding was once a holiday highlight that brought warmth and sweetness to tables during the 1940s and 1950s, becoming a memory wrapped in tradition. Cauliflower au gratin was a side dish that brought comfort and richness to 1970s dinner tables. Cauliflower florets were steamed until tender, then smothered in a cream sauce heavy with cheese and baked beneath a topping of breadcrumbs. The result was a bubbling golden dish that gave the plain vegetable an entirely new identity. Families enjoyed it as a complement to roasts, chicken, or even pork chops because it added both substance and flavor. Housewives liked it because it could be assembled ahead and baked when needed, making it ideal for busy schedules. It was creamy, hearty, and indulgent, fitting perfectly into the casserole craze of the time. Children who might have resisted cauliflower on its own often enjoyed it baked under the cheese and crumb topping. Cauliflower au gratin proved that vegetables did not have to be boring, and that with enough butter and cheese they could become centerpieces of meals. Though it feels old-fashioned today, it once represented the height of comfort cooking in the 1970s. Carrot and raisin salad was a sweet and tangy side that brightened many American tables throughout the mid-20th century. Shredded carrots were mixed with plump, sweet raisins and dressed in a creamy or tangy sauce, often based on mayonnaise or yogurt, creating a delightful balance of flavors and textures. This salad was celebrated in Betty Crocker cookbooks for its simplicity and its ability to sneak some vegetables into meals with a touch of sweetness kids would actually enjoy. The natural sugar of the raisins complemented the earthiness of the carrots, while the creamy dressing gave it richness without overwhelming the fresh ingredients. It was often served chilled, providing a cool, refreshing bite that paired well with meat dishes and casseroles. The vibrant orange and dark raisin speckles made it visually appealing, while the crunch of the carrots added a satisfying texture. Carrot and raisin salad remains a nostalgic reminder of home cooking where healthy met tasty in a perfect union. Tomato aspic salad was one of those strange creations that could only have come from a time when gelatin ruled the kitchen. It was a savory molded dish, tomato juice thickened with unflavored gelatin, then loaded with chopped celery, olives, or green peppers, depending on what Grandma had on hand. The result? A firm, wobbly side dish served cold, usually cut into slices or cubes and placed proudly next to roast beef or deviled eggs. People either adored it or found it baffling, but no one forgot it. Tomato aspic was especially popular at luncheons, bridge clubs, and church picnics, where presentation mattered just as much as taste. It looked refined, in a retro sort of way, and was always served with a smile. The tangy, lightly spicy flavor made it oddly refreshing in the summertime, even if no one asked for seconds. Some recipes even added a dab of mayonnaise on top to finish the look. Today, tomato aspic is more often the butt of jokes than a dish on the menu. But for those who grew up with it, it brings back memories of glass dishes, ruffled tablecloths, and a different kind of dining pride. Pineapple cheese salad sounds like one of those retro recipes that people talk about with equal parts horror and nostalgia, but this sweet and savory mashup was a potluck star once upon a time. You would mix canned pineapple chunks with shredded cheddar cheese and mayonnaise, sometimes tossing in a maraschino cherry on top to seal the deal. It sounds like a strange combination today, but back in the 1950s and 60s, recipes like this came straight out of the old spiral-bound cookbooks tucked in every kitchen drawer. People loved it for its bright, tangy sweetness and how easy it was to throw together with cheap pantry staples. Pineapple cheese salad showed up at luncheons, holiday tables, and potlucks, holding its own next to roast turkey, ham, or casseroles. It might raise a few eyebrows now, but back then, that quirky little salad was a way to dress up a meal and bring something special to the table without spending a fortune. In its day, this strange, creamy creation meant you came prepared. Black walnut vinegar pie offered a bold finish to any meal with its intriguing mix of sharpness and deep sweetness. Grandmother's whipped eggs, sorghum syrup, and aged black walnut vinegar into a dark filling that baked into a glossy, fragrant pie. The vinegar cut through the richness, highlighting the earthy flavor of the walnuts while leaving a gentle tang on the tongue. Served slightly warm, the pie balanced sweet and sour in a way that surprised guests and delighted those accustomed to more traditional desserts. The recipe required patience, as black walnuts demanded careful cracking, and the vinegar needed months to develop its complex character. Families who tasted this pie remembered it as a treat reserved for holidays or important gatherings, a dessert that told of long preparation and old-world skill. Ambrosia. Salad with fresh coconut was not the quick throw-together dish we see at modern potlucks, but a true labor of love. Families grated fresh coconut by hand, a time-consuming process that often required a special tool or sheer determination. Oranges were peeled and sectioned, sometimes layered with pineapple, sugar, and the freshly grated coconut in glass bowls that sparkled with color. This dish often appeared during the holidays, especially Christmas, when citrus fruits were abundant and coconuts became available in markets. Children looked forward to the sweetness, while adults valued its symbolism of abundance in lean times. Ambrosia meant more than fruit salad. It was a ritual that tied families together through both labor and enjoyment. Every bite reflected the season's generosity, even if resources were otherwise tight. Modern versions made with canned fruit and bagged coconut lack the painstaking care of the original. Forgotten by many, the old-fashioned version reminds us of a time when effort in the kitchen was an act of devotion and celebration. Its disappearance is not just about food, but about lost traditions of gathering and gratitude. Creamed spinach was a dish that once held a secure place both at home and in steakhouses. Fresh or frozen spinach was cooked down, then combined with butter, cream, and a hint of nutmeg to create a rich, velvety side. It paired beautifully with roasts and steaks, making it a favorite in both home kitchens and restaurants. Families appreciated its nutritional value as well as its comforting taste, which softened the bitterness of spinach. It was one way to get children to eat their greens, dressed up with enough creaminess to feel indulgent. In steakhouses, creamed spinach was considered essential, often appearing alongside baked potatoes as the classic pairing for a hearty dinner. Though lighter vegetable dishes eventually replaced it, creamed spinach had a long run as a dependable, beloved side. Today, it has nearly disappeared from everyday family meals, but it remains a reminder of a time when richness and comfort were valued at the dinner table as much as thrift. Mock crab salad was the thrifty answer for families who wanted the sophistication of seafood without paying seafood prices. The recipe appeared often in budget cookbooks, calling for shredded vegetables like cabbage or zucchini mixed with mayonnaise and seasoning to mimic the look and texture of crab. A splash of vinegar or lemon juice added tang, while paprika or celery seed provided color and flavor. Served chilled, it was spooned onto lettuce leaves or stuffed into tomatoes, making it look fancier than it really was. Housewives loved it because it gave the illusion of serving something indulgent while costing only pennies. It worked well as a potluck dish since it could be prepared in large batches and kept cool until serving time. For families, it was a playful way to bring variety to the table when fish was out of reach. Though it has mostly disappeared today, mock crab salad captures the spirit of resourceful 1970s cooking, where appearance and ingenuity counted for just as much as actual ingredients. Pickled cucumber relish was a tangy and crunchy condiment that brought zip and brightness to meals, often found alongside classic meat dishes. This relish, made from finely chopped pickled cucumbers mixed with onions and spices, was a staple in many Betty Crocker cookbooks as a quick way to add flavor contrast and freshness to the dinner plate. The sharp, acidic bite of the pickles balanced rich and savory mains, while the crunchy texture provided a satisfying counterpoint. This relish was versatile, serving as a side accompaniment, a topping for sandwiches, or a tangy addition to barbecue plates. Its bright green color and lively taste made it a beloved component of many mid-century American meals. The relish's easy preparation and long shelf life made it a practical favorite in home kitchens. It perfectly captured the era's love for bold flavors and simple, accessible recipes that elevated everyday meals. Scalloped corn casserole was one of those cozy, golden-topped dishes that never needed a main course to shine. It started with sweet corn, fresh, canned, or creamed, mixed with milk, eggs, a bit of sugar, and crushed saltine crackers or breadcrumbs. Then it was baked until it set into a soft, custard-like center with a crispy, buttery top. This dish showed up at potlucks, funerals, holiday dinners, anywhere people came together and needed something warm and familiar. You did not need a lot of money to make it, just pantry staples and a steady oven. The smell alone was enough to call everyone to the table. Some versions had chopped peppers or bits of onion, others stayed simple and sweet. But no matter how you made it, it had the same purpose: comfort. Scalloped corn casserole made vegetables feel indulgent, like something you could take pride in bringing to a neighbor's house. It was the kind of dish that lived in handwritten notes and passed down recipes, not cookbooks with glossy photos. And somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside for flashier sides. But for those who remember, it will always be the taste of home. Mock oyster casserole, also known as eggplant dressing, was one of those clever Depression-era recipes that made its way into old cookbooks and never fully disappeared. The name might raise a few eyebrows now, but the whole point was to create a rich, flavorful casserole that mimicked the texture and heartiness of oyster stuffing without needing expensive seafood. You would take cooked eggplant, breadcrumbs, onions, and herbs, bake it until golden on top, and serve it as a side dish at holiday dinners or Sunday suppers. It filled out the table, stretched garden produce, and made even the simplest meal feel just a little more complete. Back then, you could find recipes like this scribbled in the margins of faded cookbooks or passed along at church potlucks. People knew how to make do with what they had, and this casserole proved that even eggplant could stand in for something fancier. You might not find it on modern menus, but back then, eggplant dressing was a practical, comforting side that made every meal feel just a little more special. Creekbank smoked eels celebrated the quiet abundance of southern waterways, where families fished for more than just sport. Grandmothers cleaned freshly caught eels, rubbed them with salt and wild herbs, and hung them over smoldering hardwood fires along the creek's edge. Hours of slow smoking transformed the firm flesh into something tender and richly flavored with wood smoke and earth. Served alongside hot cornbread and a simple salad of foraged greens, the eel became a centerpiece that surprised those unfamiliar with its delicate taste. Children learned both fishing skills and respect for the land as they watched the careful preparation. This meal reflected a time when local rivers and creeks provided not only recreation but reliable sustenance. Creekbank smoked eel remains a vivid memory of evenings spent near moving water, when the fading light and curling smoke marked the rhythm of family life and the enduring connection between southern kitchens and the natural world that surrounded them. Souse meat was a dish that reflected both thrift and creativity, a cousin to hog's head cheese with its own distinct preparation. It was made from pork scraps, often feet or ears, boiled until tender and then pickled in vinegar with spices. Once cooled and pressed into a loaf, it was sliced and eaten cold with crackers or bread. Families valued it because it used parts of the animal that would otherwise go to waste, stretching limited resources into multiple meals. The tangy, pickled flavor gave it a sharpness that stood out from other pork dishes, making it memorable even if not beloved by everyone. Souse meat was a common sight at butchers and small groceries, sold cheaply to working families. Children often avoided it, but older generations considered it a practical staple. Today, souse meat has nearly vanished, its strong taste and rustic image less appealing to modern palates. Still, it remains a marker of a time when nothing edible was ever discarded. Spinach soufflé was a side dish that felt refined, light, and a little intimidating for the average cook. It required careful preparation, folding whipped egg whites into spinach and cheese to create a fluffy, savory bake. Housewives who mastered it often served it proudly at Sunday dinners or dinner parties, knowing it was more impressive than ordinary vegetables. Families appreciated its airy texture, which turned spinach into something indulgent and elegant. Children might not have rushed toward it, but the creamy richness made it easier to eat than plain boiled greens. The dish reflected an era when time and patience were still part of cooking, long before convenience foods dominated. Recipes circulated in magazines and cookbooks, showcasing soufflés as signs of culinary skill. Yet as kitchens moved toward faster meals, delicate dishes like this faded away. Spinach soufflé now feels like a relic of an age when cooking itself was a performance, a reminder of the pride families once took in presenting sides as works of art. Cucumber Bavarian cream was one of the most unusual molded salads of the 1970s. Cucumbers were pureed, blended with gelatin, and folded into cream before being poured into molds and chilled. The result was a pale green dish with a smooth texture and cool, refreshing flavor. It was often served in slices as part of buffet spreads, adding a quirky yet elegant note to the table. Guests were intrigued by its appearance, even if the flavor surprised them. Housewives liked it because it took a simple, inexpensive vegetable and transformed it into something striking. It was also considered refined, borrowing from European influences that were fashionable at the time. While the texture confused some diners, others found it light and refreshing. Cucumber Bavarian cream may sound peculiar now, but it showcased the 1970s willingness to experiment with ingredients and forms. It was playful, creative, and a reminder that even the humblest vegetable could become something entirely unexpected. Marinated beets were a vibrant and tangy side dish that brought a burst of color and flavor to mid-century tables. These tender beets were soaked in a vinegar-based marinade seasoned with spices such as cloves, peppercorns, and bay leaves. The soaking process infused the beets with a bright acidity that perfectly balanced their natural earthiness. Betty Crocker cookbooks highlighted marinated beets as a simple yet elegant accompaniment, ideal for cutting through richer dishes and adding a refreshing contrast. The dish was popular for its ability to be prepared ahead of time and its pleasing mix of sweet, sour, and savory notes. Often served chilled, marinated beets were a festive favorite during holiday meals and summer dinners alike. Their bold red hue made them a striking addition to any plate, while their complex flavor made them beloved by both home cooks and guests. This recipe showcased the vintage kitchen's knack for turning humble vegetables into memorable sides that stood out in both taste and appearance. Creamed chipped carrots were never flashy, but they had their place in Grandma's dinner rotation. She would slice carrots thin, sometimes with a hand crank slicer, and simmer them until tender, then fold them into a creamy white sauce with butter and flour. The sauce was just enough to coat the carrots without drowning them, adding a gentle richness that softened their natural sweetness. You would find them beside meatloaf or roast turkey, sometimes served in little ramekins or scooped straight from a saucepan. It was a quiet dish, comforting in a way that did not ask for attention. No spices, no tricks, just care, warmth, and the steady flavor of carrots made special. They were easy to prepare, cheap to make, and always familiar. These days, carrots are raw in lunchboxes or roasted with glaze, but the creamed version is nearly forgotten. Yet there was a time when this simple dish brought real joy to the table. It deserves more than silence. Hominy casserole bake was one of those hearty, dependable sides that quietly held Southern kitchens together, especially when every meal had to count. You would take cooked hominy, mix it with shredded cheese, a little cream, top it with breadcrumbs, and bake it until bubbling and golden. It was simple, filling, and made sure nothing went to waste. Hominy casserole bake showed up at church suppers, family reunions, and holidays, especially in rural areas where pantry staples had to stretch. It might sound old-fashioned now, but this cheesy casserole was pure comfort on a plate, adding a little richness to meals built around fried meats, barbecue, or stews. You would find it in vintage cookbooks, passed down from neighbors or scribbled on recipe cards with curled edges. It has mostly slipped off dinner tables today, but back then it turned humble ingredients into something worth gathering around. Families leaned on simple dishes like this to bring warmth to the table without spending much. It filled bellies and brought people together, reminding everyone how far frugal, clever cooking could go. Spider pan. Apple stack delighted families with layers of skillet-fried apples built high like a rustic cake. Grandmothers sliced tart orchard apples thin and cooked them in a heavy spider pan, the old name for a cast-iron skillet with sturdy legs. Each batch was sprinkled with cane sugar and a touch of cinnamon, then carefully stacked while still hot, so the juices melded into a sticky, fragrant tower. The pan sat right on the hearth or over an open flame, filling the room with the comforting scent of caramelized fruit. Served warm, the stack could be sliced like a pie, releasing ribbons of sweet apple syrup with every cut. Children eagerly awaited their turn to watch the apples bubble and to taste the golden edges straight from the pan. Spider Pan Apple Stack reflects the Southern love of cast-iron cooking and the ability to create a show-stopping dessert with nothing more than orchard fruit, patience, and a steady hand at the hearth. Field pea salad was a thrifty dish that made the most of seasonal legumes, mixing fresh field peas with peppers, onions, and vinegar. Served chilled, it was a refreshing side for hot Southern summers, often brought to church picnics or family reunions. The tang of vinegar balanced the earthiness of the peas, making it both simple and satisfying. Families appreciated it as a cheap, garden-based dish that stretched across gatherings. Children often picked peas from pods, their small hands helping prepare what would later fill large bowls. Field pea salad was more than just food. It represented the connection between gardens and tables, showing how nothing went to waste. Its bright flavors stood out among heavier Southern fare, giving balance to meals. Today, it has slipped from popularity, replaced by mayonnaise-heavy salads and modern sides. Forgotten in many kitchens, its memory lingers in old recipe boxes. Field pea salad was proof that even the humblest ingredients could shine when handled with care. Three-bean salad was once a guaranteed sight at picnics and reunions, its bright colors and tangy flavor standing out among heavier dishes. The mix of green beans, wax beans, and kidney beans marinated in a vinegar dressing made it both refreshing and economical. Housewives loved how simple it was to prepare, since all it required was canned beans, vinegar, sugar, and oil, plus maybe a few onions if available. The salad could be made in advance, stored in the refrigerator, and brought out ready to serve, which made it perfect for busy families. Its sweet and sour tang cut through greasy barbecue or fried chicken, making it practical as well as tasty. Children sometimes picked around the beans, but most adults welcomed it as a lighter dish among calorie-heavy meals. Over time, creamy potato salads and coleslaws began to replace it, pushing three-bean salad out of favor. Once a star of the picnic table, it is now rarely made at all, leaving behind memories of simpler gatherings where vinegar and sugar worked small miracles in everyday cooking. Celery with pimiento cheese was a simple but striking buffet favorite that added a pop of color to spreads filled with casseroles and meats. Celery stalks were trimmed, chilled until crisp, and then stuffed with a bright orange pimiento cheese spread. The combination of creamy, sharp cheese with crunchy celery made for a satisfying bite. It was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and visually appealing, which is why it appeared at so many parties, picnics, and luncheons. The pimiento spread itself was made with cheddar, mayonnaise, and diced pimentos, giving it a tangy and slightly sweet edge. Children enjoyed the crunch, while adults praised its nostalgic flavor. It was often arranged on trays in neat rows, making it look both tidy and inviting. Celery with pimiento cheese was the kind of dish that carried Southern influence into mainstream gatherings during the 1970s. Though overlooked now, it once stood as a dependable, cheerful option that could be counted on to disappear quickly from the table. Eggplant Parmesan bites were small baked slices of eggplant layered with tomato sauce and cheese, creating finger food that was both indulgent and convenient. These bite-sized delights appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an appetizer or side dish that offered a taste of Italian-inspired comfort food. The eggplant slices were breaded and baked or lightly fried, then topped with rich tomato sauce and melted mozzarella or Parmesan cheese. The layering of flavors and textures made for a satisfying bite that was crispy on the edges and gooey on top. Eggplant Parmesan bites were popular at parties and family dinners, providing a crowd-pleasing option that was easy to serve and eat. Their warm, savory profile made them a beloved side that added a touch of elegance without fuss. This dish reflected the mid-century American embrace of international flavors adapted to home cooking traditions. Creamed pearl tapioca was a dish that confused most people the first time they saw it, but it had a quiet charm that stuck. Grandma would cook the tiny pearls slowly until they turned translucent and soft, then fold them into a thick, savory base with cheese, onions, or even bits of ham or mushrooms. It was like a casserole crossed with a pudding. Strange, but comforting. The texture was warm and creamy, with a soft bite that held everything together. You would not find it on many dinner tables today, but back then, it was a way to stretch ingredients and use up pantry staples in unexpected ways. It was often baked until the top turned golden and set, then scooped onto the plate beside a roast or served in ramekins for something a little more refined. It had a richness that felt out of place for how inexpensive it was to make. Most people remember tapioca as a sweet dessert, but this version belonged to the savory world, and it was a world all its own. Wilted lettuce salad with vinegar dressing was the forgotten side dish that brought warmth, tang, and a little bacon grease magic to family tables all across the South. You would take fresh lettuce, usually straight from the garden, pour hot bacon drippings mixed with vinegar, sugar, and a pinch of salt over the top, and watch the greens wilt down into tender, flavorful bites. It sounds odd to serve salad that way today, but back then, this was comfort food at its finest. Families leaned on recipes like this to use up garden produce, stretch ingredients, and add a hearty, savory side to meals without spending extra money. Wilted lettuce salad was a regular at potlucks, Sunday suppers, and backyard gatherings, sitting proudly next to fried chicken, biscuits, or whatever main dish folks scraped together. You could dress it up with sliced onions, hard-boiled eggs, or crumbled bacon when you had extra to spare. Bay laurel leaf pudding infused a humble custard with the subtle perfume of evergreen leaves, bringing a hint of old-world sophistication to rural southern kitchens. Grandmothers steeped fresh bay leaves in warm milk, allowing their gentle aroma to blend with sugar, eggs, and a touch of cream. The mixture was slowly steamed until it set into a silky dessert that carried a faint herbal sweetness and a whisper of the forest. Served cool or slightly warm, the pudding offered a flavor both comforting and unexpected, perfect for quiet evenings or special guests. Children often helped gather the glossy leaves, learning which branches held the best scent. The dessert's soft texture and delicate fragrance made it stand out among heavier sweets of the era. Bay laurel leaf pudding illustrates how Southern grandmothers blended European culinary heritage with local ingredients, creating a dish that was elegant yet firmly rooted in the natural abundance of their own backyard gardens and wooded hillsides. Poke salad greens were a classic example of Depression-era foraging turned into food tradition, though they required care and skill. Pokeweed grows wild across the South, and its young leaves were harvested, boiled, and drained several times to remove natural toxins. Once prepared safely, the greens were fried with bacon fat or mixed into stews, providing a much-needed source of vitamins. For poor rural families, poke salad represented survival, turning something free and wild into a filling side dish. It was not glamorous, but it carried the pride of resourcefulness in desperate times. Poke salad suppers even became community events in some areas, celebrating a food that was both humble and dangerous if mishandled. Children grew up knowing that only the young leaves were safe to eat, while older parts of the plant were poisonous. Today, few people bother with the time or risk, leaving poke salad largely forgotten except in folklore. It remains a powerful reminder of how closely people once lived with the land. Baked macaroni and tomatoes was a hearty casserole that stood proudly on dinner tables before creamy macaroni and cheese became the standard. It combined pasta with stewed or canned tomatoes, seasoned with onions, salt, and pepper, then baked until the flavors melded together. Families appreciated its affordability since both macaroni and canned tomatoes were inexpensive staples available throughout the year. The dish was filling and could easily serve as either a side or a main meal when money was tight. Housewives liked how flexible it was, often adding bits of bacon, cheese, or leftover vegetables when available. Children enjoyed the tangy tomato flavor, which was far more exciting than plain noodles. It was especially common in the 1940s and 1950s, when pantry cooking shaped much of American dining. Though baked macaroni and tomatoes has largely vanished from modern meals, it remains a snapshot of mid-century kitchens, where practicality ruled and flavor was drawn from whatever ingredients could be stretched farthest. For many families, it was comfort food at its most frugal and dependable. Apricot rice salad blended sweet and savory flavors in a way that reflected the experimental side of 1970s kitchens. Cooked rice was chilled and then mixed with apricot preserves, chopped nuts, and sometimes a splash of lemon juice. The mixture was scooped into bowls or molded into rings, often garnished with lettuce for presentation. It was both filling and refreshing, combining the substance of rice with the sweetness of fruit. Housewives liked it because it could be made ahead and served cold, perfect for summer gatherings. The addition of nuts added texture and richness, while the apricot gave it a golden glow that stood out on crowded tables. Children found it fun because it felt like a dessert, while adults appreciated the unusual flavor balance. Apricot rice salad was a reflection of the decade's willingness to blur the lines between savory and sweet, salad and dessert. It is rarely seen today, but it once carried pride as a quirky, eye-catching dish that was affordable and memorable. Baked parsnips with honey was a sweet and warming side that showcased roasted parsnips glazed with honey and herbs for a unique vintage flavor. This dish appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a comforting root vegetable recipe that turned humble parsnips into a subtly sweet, caramelized delight. The parsnips were peeled, sliced, and baked until tender, then drizzled with honey and sprinkled with herbs such as thyme or rosemary to add fragrance and depth. The honey enhanced the natural sweetness of the parsnips, creating a rich glaze that coated each bite with warmth and flavor. Served alongside roasted meats or poultry, this side brought a touch of elegance and seasonal comfort to the table. Baked parsnips with honey captured the mid-century love for transforming simple vegetables into memorable dishes through the magic of roasting and glazing. It remains a nostalgic favorite for those seeking a sweet and savory vegetable accompaniment with old-fashioned charm. Sunshine carrot salad was one of the brightest and cheeriest dishes on 1970s buffet tables. Grated carrots were mixed with raisins and crushed pineapple, then bound together with mayonnaise. The result was colorful, sweet, and tangy, offering a refreshing balance to heavier foods. It was a favorite at picnics and church suppers because it was inexpensive and easy to make in large quantities. Housewives liked it because it looked vibrant and wholesome, while children enjoyed the sweet fruit mixed in with the vegetables. It carried the cheerful name of Sunshine Carrot Salad because of its bright orange hue and fruity flavor. The mayonnaise added creaminess that turned it into more of a salad than a dessert, though it walked the line between the two. Sunshine Carrot Salad may not have survived modern tastes, but in the 1970s it represented the desire to make everyday vegetables more appealing. It was simple, colorful, and dependable, which made it a lasting memory for many families. Baked cheese grits casserole was the kind of rich, creamy side dish that made Southern tables feel whole, showing up at Sunday dinners, holiday spreads, and community potlucks when comfort food was king. You would cook up grits until soft, mix in butter, cheese, eggs, and sometimes a little cream, then bake the whole thing until bubbly with a crisp, golden top. It was hearty, affordable, and easy to pull together with pantry staples, making it a go-to for feeding families, friends, and neighbors without breaking the bank. Baked cheese grits casserole came straight from the pages of old cookbooks, the kind tucked in kitchen drawers or passed down through generations in handwritten recipe cards. Families leaned on dishes like this because it stretched ingredients, filled plates, and added that creamy, comforting balance to heavy main courses like ham, fried chicken, or pork chops. You might not find it on modern menus outside the South today, but back then, it was a dependable, beloved side that made even the humblest meal feel complete. It was simple, it was filling, and it was pure comfort, straight from the heart of the kitchen. Benny seed cookies were small, nutty treats rooted in Gullah culture, treasured for both flavor and symbolism. Made with beni seeds, a type of sesame brought from Africa, these cookies were crisp, lightly sweet, and full of heritage. They were often baked for holidays, celebrations, or as gifts, carrying meaning beyond the plate. For generations, families passed down recipes, with each batch representing resilience and tradition. Children eagerly waited for them at special gatherings, their delicate crunch setting them apart from ordinary sweets. Unlike store-bought cookies, beni seed cookies carried the weight of ancestry, a taste tied to identity. They showcased how African ingredients shaped Southern foodways in lasting ways. Today, they are rarely made outside of dedicated cultural circles or festivals, overshadowed by more mainstream desserts. Their absence reflects not just a shift in taste, but a loss of connection to history. Forgotten by many, beni seed cookies remain a culinary treasure worth remembering for their story as much as their flavor. Carrot and raisin salad was a sweet, crunchy side that once graced potluck tables and school cafeterias across the country. Grated carrots were mixed with raisins, sometimes pineapple, and bound together with mayonnaise or a light dressing. The result was tangy, colorful, and refreshing, a side dish that walked the line between salad and dessert. Families liked it because it used inexpensive ingredients and could be prepared quickly with no cooking required. Children were often more willing to eat carrots when they were paired with sweet raisins, which made it a practical choice for parents. The salad also traveled well, making it a favorite for community gatherings and picnics. It symbolized mid-century dining habits, where dishes were expected to be both thrifty and cheerful. Over time, changing tastes made its sweetness seem odd next to savory mains, and it gradually disappeared from tables. Carrot and raisin salad is rarely made today, but for decades it represented the simple, homey balance of nutrition and comfort. Cottage cheese ring with vegetables was another molded side dish that highlighted how much the 1970s embraced shapes and presentation. Cottage cheese was whipped with gelatin until it could hold its form, then set into a ring mold and chilled. The hollow center was filled with cold vegetables like peppers, celery, or cucumbers. The dish was creamy, tangy, and refreshing, making it a curious addition to potlucks and luncheons. Guests were often impressed by its tidy presentation, and the mixture of textures made it interesting to eat. It was one of those recipes that stretched inexpensive cottage cheese into something bigger and more impressive. Housewives valued it because it could be made ahead and kept chilled until serving time, freeing up energy for other preparations. It was thrifty but visually striking, capturing the era's fascination with molds. While it may not appeal to modern tastes, cottage cheese ring with vegetables once stood as a proud centerpiece of 1970s gatherings. Smashed peas and potatoes was a creamy, comforting side dish that combined mashed peas and potatoes into a smooth, lightly seasoned blend. This vintage recipe appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an economical and satisfying vegetable side that brought together the best of two staples. Peas were cooked until tender, then mashed together with boiled potatoes, butter, salt, and pepper to create a velvety texture and harmonious flavor. The dish was praised for its simplicity and heartiness, offering a way to stretch ingredients while still delivering on taste and nutrition. Smashed peas and potatoes was often served with roasted meats or fried dishes, providing a creamy and slightly sweet complement. Its mild flavor and smooth consistency made it a family-friendly choice that could be prepared quickly and easily. This recipe reflects the mid-century focus on comfort and practicality in the kitchen, turning simple vegetables into a satisfying and nostalgic side dish. Parsnip and carrot mash was a rustic dish that felt both hearty and refined, depending on how Grandma served it. She would boil peeled carrots and parsnips until soft, then mash them with butter, salt, and just a dash of cream or broth. The result was a golden mash with a hint of sweetness and a whisper of spice, thanks to the natural flavors of the vegetables. It was lighter than mashed potatoes, but still deeply satisfying. Often served alongside roast chicken or pork, it brought color and comfort to the table. Parsnips had a stronger flavor than carrots, so Grandma would sometimes tone it down with a bit of apple or potato if she had it. The mash was served hot, usually with a pat of butter melting into the top, and it filled the kitchen with a rich, earthy smell. These days, most people skip parsnips altogether or never think to mash them. But this was a dish that stretched garden roots into something nourishing and beautiful. It was humble food made with care, and that made all the difference. Creamed peas on toast points was one of those simple yet oddly elegant sides that showed up on dinner tables and cafe menus all across America, especially when money was tight. You would simmer soft peas in a creamy, buttery sauce, spoon them over crisp triangles of toasted bread, and serve them with roast meats or as a light lunch all by themselves. This recipe came straight from those old faded cookbooks where frugal, filling meals ruled the kitchen. It proved even basic ingredients like canned peas and day-old bread could turn into something satisfying when you got creative. Back in the 1940s and 50s, meals like this helped families stretch groceries while still feeling polished and proper at the table. Creamed peas on toast points showed up at Sunday suppers, holiday dinners, and even tea time spreads because it was comforting, affordable, and easy to whip together when groceries were running low. It might sound simple now, but back then, this creamy, green-topped toast was a welcome sight. Sweet potato pone was once a staple Southern dessert, made from grated sweet potatoes mixed with butter, milk, and spices, then baked until golden. Unlike pie, it was dense and pudding-like, often cooked in simple pans without crusts. Families prized it for its versatility. It could be sweetened with molasses for richness or left plainer for a more filling dish. Sweet potato pone appeared at holidays, Sunday suppers, and family reunions, tying communities together through familiar flavor. Children loved its sweetness, while adults appreciated its ability to stretch limited ingredients into something comforting. Unlike many desserts, it required no fancy tools or ingredients, relying instead on what farmers grew in abundance. Its disappearance from modern tables is due in part to convenience foods and changing tastes, but older Southerners still speak of it with affection. Sweet potato pone was not just food, it was comfort, memory, and tradition baked into every bite. Forgotten today, it remains a quiet symbol of Southern resilience and the power of simple cooking. Cottage cheese with canned peaches was once promoted as a health-conscious side, showing up in both school cafeterias and family dining rooms. A scoop of cottage cheese placed on a lettuce leaf topped with a peach half from a can was considered both attractive and nutritious. Housewives appreciated how quickly it could be prepared, requiring no cooking at all. It fit the mid-century belief in light, protein-rich meals, offering a break from heavier starchy sides. Children sometimes enjoyed the sweetness of the peaches, but were less convinced by the curds of cottage cheese. Still, the dish was embraced because it was affordable and widely adaptable. It appeared often in diet magazines and cookbooks of the 1970s, tied to ideas of eating healthy while still feeling indulgent. Today, cottage cheese with canned peaches has largely disappeared from family tables, replaced by modern health trends. But once, it stood as a proud example of how simple pairings could deliver both flavor and nutrition without straining household budgets. Shredded wheat tomato bake was one of those unusual dishes that turned a breakfast staple into something savory for dinner tables. Housewives would layer shredded wheat biscuits in a casserole dish, pour stewed tomatoes over them, and top it with grated cheese. When baked, the biscuits softened into a dense base that absorbed all the tomato flavor, while the cheese formed a golden crust. It was thrifty, creative, and surprisingly filling, making it a dependable addition for meatless nights. Children often raised eyebrows at the sight, but many families relied on it to stretch limited groceries. It carried a home-style charm and was easy to put together using pantry items that were already on hand. Though it may sound odd today, shredded wheat tomato bake reflected the 1970s trend of experimentation in casseroles. It was practical, it was comforting, and it showed how resourceful cooks were in making the most of what they had. While forgotten now, it once carried a quiet sense of pride to Buffett spreads. Pickled beets and eggs were once a pantry staple in rural households, bringing both color and nutrition to the family table. Hard-boiled eggs were stored in jars with beets, vinegar, sugar, and spices, creating a striking pink hue and tangy flavor. This dish was practical because it kept well without refrigeration, making it ideal for farm families or those with limited storage. The flavor was bold and unusual, with the eggs taking on the sweetness and acidity of the beet brine. Children often found them strange, but adults enjoyed their brightness as a change from plain sides. They were especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens, where they carried cultural significance. The dish required little effort and used inexpensive ingredients, which was valuable during rationing years. Though rarely seen on tables now, pickled beets and eggs were once an essential reminder of frugality, resourcefulness, and the joy of adding color and flavor to otherwise simple meals during the mid-century years. Cheesy cauliflower gratin was a rich and indulgent vegetable side that found a special place in many vintage kitchens. Tender cauliflower florets were smothered in a creamy, cheesy sauce before being baked under a crispy layer of toasted breadcrumbs. This gratin was a perfect example of comfort food, combining the mild flavor of cauliflower with the lusciousness of melted cheese and a golden, crunchy top. Betty Crocker cookbooks featured this dish as a versatile accompaniment for both everyday meals and holiday feasts. Its creamy texture and cheesy goodness made it a hit with both children and adults, especially those who might usually shy away from vegetables. The gratin's warm, bubbling surface was a welcome sight at any dinner table, signaling a dish full of hearty flavor and homestyle care. This recipe demonstrated how simple vegetables could be transformed into something special and satisfying, making cheesy cauliflower gratin a nostalgic classic worth revisiting. Cornmeal mush was a dish born out of need, but remembered for its quiet comfort. Grandma would cook cornmeal slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a soft porridge, then pour it into a pan to chill overnight. By morning, it would be firm enough to slice, and she would fry it in a hot skillet until the edges turned crisp and golden. It was eaten with butter, syrup, or even a fried egg on top, whatever the pantry allowed. This was not flashy food, it was sustenance, plain and simple. But it filled bellies, warmed cold mornings, and never cost more than a few cents to make. Some people grew up thinking of it as Southern fare, others knew it as polenta. But in Grandma's kitchen, it was just cornmeal mush. It showed up at breakfast more often than not, especially during lean months. These days, it is almost never mentioned outside of old cookbooks or Appalachian food blogs. But it deserves a second look. Few dishes stretch so far, last so long, or feel quite so honest on a plate. Potato puff bake was one of those thrifty, comforting sides that turned plain old mashed potatoes into something brand new with hardly any extra effort. Families back then knew how to stretch leftovers, and this recipe proved it. You would take yesterday's mashed potatoes, mix in an egg or two, maybe a little butter or milk, and bake them in small mounds until they puffed up golden brown on the outside but stayed soft and fluffy in the center. Potato puff bake found its way into all those old spiral-bound cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because it was cheap, filling, and practical. Back in the day, wasting food was not an option, and turning leftovers into something that felt special at dinner was just smart kitchen work. You would serve them next to roast meats, pork chops, or with a little gravy when not much else was on hand. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it made a plain meal stretch farther. You hardly see them now, but back then, potato puffs were a dependable trick that kept families fed and made every meal feel just a little more complete. Hominy stew, inspired by native and African influences, was a hearty dish that showcased the South's diverse food roots. Made by simmering hominy corn with pork bones, onions, and peppers, it created a filling stew with smoky depth. It resembled pozole from native traditions, adapted by African-American cooks into regional variations. For rural households, it was an economical way to use cheap cuts and corn, stretching ingredients into something both nourishing and flavorful. Families gathered around bowls of it during cold nights, finding comfort in its simplicity. The dish also carried cultural history, reflecting centuries of blending traditions in Southern kitchens. Each spoonful connected communities across time, reminding people of resilience and shared heritage. Though once widespread, hominy stew has largely vanished from modern tables, overshadowed by canned soups and quicker meals. It remains a dish remembered in pockets of the South, where cooks keep old recipes alive. Its story is one of survival, adaptation, and flavor born from necessity. Celery stuffed with pimento cheese was a snack-like side dish that found a place in many mid-century homes. Crisp celery sticks were filled with creamy pimento cheese spread, creating a balance of crunch and richness. It was served at luncheons, picnics, and family dinners, often set out as part of the side spread rather than a starter. Housewives liked it because it was quick to prepare, colorful on the plate, and inexpensive, relying mostly on pantry staples. Children often grabbed these celery sticks without complaint, making them one of the easier ways to sneak vegetables into the meal. The pimento cheese filling could be homemade or store-bought, depending on resources, and was flexible enough to stretch over large gatherings. It represented the era's love of convenience foods that could still feel homemade. Though celery stuffed with pimento cheese has mostly disappeared, it once reflected the creativity of thrifty households, proving that even the simplest vegetables could become a beloved side dish with just a little imagination. Puffed wheat casserole was an inventive way to take a breakfast cereal and turn it into a savory side dish. Housewives would mix puffed wheat with a cheesy sauce, spread it in a baking dish, and bake until bubbly and golden. The cereal acted like breadcrumbs, giving the dish a toasty crunch on top while softening inside. It was unusual but surprisingly comforting, and it showed the willingness of 1970s kitchens to stretch pantry staples in new directions. Puffed wheat casserole paired well with meats or stood on its own for light meals. Children liked it because of the cereal connection, while adults appreciated its frugality and flavor. It was easy to prepare in large pans, making it a natural fit for potlucks. Though it has mostly disappeared, it embodies the spirit of reimagining everyday ingredients. Puffed wheat casserole may sound strange now, but in the 1970s it carried warmth, thrift, and a dash of creativity that made it memorable. If an old cookbook ever made you hungry for the past, drop your favorite dish below and hit like and subscribe for more.